When love came with baggage. A widowed rancher expected duty. What arrived changed everything. If you've ever felt invisible, ever wondered if you'd ever be chosen, not for what you could give, but for who you are, then stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale of second chances travels. The stagecoach was late. Caleb Hartley stood on the porch of his ranch house, hat pulled low against the September sun, watching the road with the kind of patience a man learns when he's spent too many years waiting for things that don't matter anymore. The Wyoming wind carried dust and sage across his land, 2,000 acres that produced more cattle than most operations twice its size, land that made him wealthy by frontier standards and empty by every measure that counted. Behind him, the house sprawled silent and clean, maintained with the precision of a man who'd learned that keeping things in order was easier than feeling them fall apart. "You're really going through with this?" Caleb didn't turn at his sister Margaret's voice. She'd ridden over from town that morning, ostensibly to help prepare, actually to judge. Margaret had the sharp edges their mother had possessed, the kind of righteousness that wore the mask of concern. "You made the arrangements," Caleb said quietly, "because you were wasting away out here like some hermit. Sarah's been gone 4 years, Caleb. 4 years of you working yourself into the ground, eating meals that taste like obligation, living in a house that might as well be a mausoleum." Margaret moved beside him, her riding dress immaculate despite the journey. "A wife will fix that. Children, eventually, a household that feels alive again." Caleb said nothing. He'd learned years ago that Margaret didn't actually want responses. She wanted agreement. "The agency assured me she's respectable," Margaret continued, her tone suggesting she'd verified this multiple times. "A widow herself, 32 years old, experienced in household management. No scandals, no debts, the kind of woman who understands duty." Duty. The word sat in Caleb's chest like a stone. His marriage to Sarah had been built on duty too. Duty to family expectations, to merging properties, to producing heirs that never came. They'd been cordial strangers sharing a house, and when fever took her during a bitter winter, Caleb had mourned not the woman, but the failure of ever knowing her. He'd sworn then that he was done. Done with trying. Done with the pretense that proximity meant partnership. But Margaret had worn him down with her relentless campaign, and 6 months ago, in a moment of weakness that felt like surrender, he'd agreed to her plan. Let the agency find someone. Let duty have another chance to masquerade as something more. The stagecoach appeared finally, a dark speck against the golden grassland, growing larger as it navigated the rutted road toward the ranch. Caleb's hands tightened on the porch rail, calloused palms rough against weathered wood. "Remember," Margaret said, her voice dropping to something almost gentle. "She's coming here for security. You're offering her a home, a position, respectability. That's more than most women in her circumstances can hope for. Just be kind, Caleb. You don't have to love her. Just be kind." The stagecoach pulled to a stop in front of the house, its team blowing hard from the climb. The driver, a grizzled man named Hutchins who'd been running this route for 20 years, set the brake and climbed down without his usual commentary. Something in his expression made Caleb's stomach tighten. "Mr. Hartley," Hutchins said, touching his hat brim. His eyes slid away. "Got your delivery." Caleb descended the porch steps, aware of Margaret following, aware of the ranch hands pausing in their work to watch from a respectful distance. This was theater, he realized, his life reduced to performance. The stagecoach door opened. What emerged first was not a woman, but a child. A little girl, perhaps 5 years old, with brown hair and careful braids and a worn calico dress that had been mended so many times the original pattern barely showed. She stepped down carefully, then immediately turned back, reaching up with both hands. "Come on, Rosie," the child whispered. "It's okay." A second child appeared, identical to the first in every detail except for the fear written more plainly across her features. The girls gripped each other's hands with the desperate unity of creatures who'd learned the world was safer faced together. Behind them, moving slowly as if trying not to startle anyone, came the woman. Caleb had prepared himself for many possibilities. The agency had sent no photograph, only descriptions that used words like suitable and capable. He'd imagined someone plain, perhaps, worn by hardship but serviceable, someone who would fit into the empty spaces of his house without requiring too much accommodation. Eliza Moore was not what he'd imagined. She was substantial. That was the word that came to mind first. Substantial in the way the land was substantial, solid and real in a world that often felt like vapor. Her dress was simple brown calico, clean but faded, fitted to a body that curved in ways society deemed improper for a woman to display. Her face was round, honest, free of the delicate features that magazines claim beauty required. Dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, hands red and rough from work, eyes that met his for only a second before dropping to the ground. "Mr. Hartley," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Eliza Moore. I know this ain't what you expected." Beside him, Caleb heard Margaret's sharp intake of breath. Not shock exactly. Disappointment. "She didn't mention children," Margaret said, the words tight. "The agency said nothing about children." Eliza's hand moved to the twins, pulling them slightly behind her skirts in a gesture so instinctive it looked like reflex. "They're good girls, ma'am. They won't be no trouble. They can sleep anywhere, a barn loft even. They're used to—" "There's no need for that," Caleb said, his voice rougher than intended. He saw Eliza flinch slightly, saw the girls press closer to her. He forced himself to soften his tone. "The house has rooms, plenty of rooms." "The agency was very clear about the terms," Margaret said, and there was steel beneath her propriety now. "This arrangement was for a wife, Caleb, not a ready-made family, not—" She looked at Eliza with the kind of assessment women gave each other when measuring worth by appearance. "Perhaps there's been some misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding, ma'am," Eliza said quietly. Her hands were trembling now, Caleb noticed, but her voice held steady. "I wrote everything plain in my letters, about Lila and Rose, about my circumstances. The agency said it would all be explained." Margaret turned to Caleb with an expression that said clearly, "Send her back." Caleb looked at the woman before him, at the children who were trying so hard to be small, to be invisible, already preparing themselves for rejection. He thought about the empty house behind him, about meals eaten in silence, about the peculiar loneliness of living surrounded by land and possessions and accomplishment while feeling nothing at all. He thought about Sarah, who died without either of them ever saying anything true. "You must be tired," he said to Eliza. "It's a long journey from— Where did you come from?" "Kansas, sir, a town called Abilene. We've been traveling for near 2 weeks." Eliza's hand moved to the girls' heads, a protective gesture that was also somehow apologetic. "The stage stop in Cheyenne, they said we were close. The girls, they tried to be quiet. They're good at being quiet." Something about those words, "they're good at being quiet," landed wrong in Caleb's chest. Children shouldn't have to be good at being quiet. Children should be loud and wild and unafraid. "Margaret," he said, not looking at his sister, "perhaps you could show Miss Moore—" "Mrs. Moore," Eliza corrected softly. "I'm widowed, sir. My husband, he died 3 years back. Accident at the rail yard. I've been working where I could since, cooking mostly, but with the girls—" She trailed off, the economics of her situation clear without elaboration. "Mrs. Moore," Caleb continued, "and her daughters to the house. The blue room upstairs, I think. It gets good morning light." "Caleb?" Margaret's voice carried warning. "A word in private— Later." He kept his eyes on Eliza, saw the confusion there, the wariness of someone waiting for the other shoe to drop. "You'll want to wash up, I expect. Get settled. We can talk about arrangements over supper." "I can cook," Eliza said quickly. "That's what I'm good at, sir. I ain't pretty, I know that. But I can cook, and I can keep a house. And the girls, they're smart. Lila can already read some, and Rose, she's good with numbers. They won't be underfoot, I promise. They know how to stay out of the way." They know how to stay out of the way. Another phrase that hurt to hear. "There's no call for staying out of the way," Caleb said. He looked down at the twins who stared back with enormous eyes, still holding each other's hands like lifelines. "What are your names?" The girls looked at their mother, seeking permission. Eliza nodded slightly. "I'm Lila," said the first girl, the one who'd stepped down from the coach with more confidence. "This is Rose. We're 5. We'll be 6 next spring. Well, Lila and Rose, Caleb said, crouching down so he was closer to their level. Welcome to the Broken H Ranch. You see that barn over there? We've got a new calf that was born just last week. Maybe tomorrow, if your mama says it's all right, you can come see her. She doesn't have a name yet. Been waiting for someone to give her one. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. Fear giving way to cautious wonder. Rose whispered something to Lila, who whispered back, and then they both looked at Eliza with identical expressions of fragile hope. That's kind of you, sir," Eliza said. Her voice had gone thick, and she was blinking rapidly. "Real kind." Caleb stood, aware that Margaret was radiating fury beside him, aware that ranch hands were watching this entire exchange with interest that would fuel gossip for weeks. He should care about that. He should care about appearances and propriety and what the agency had promised versus what had arrived. But what he felt instead was something he hadn't experienced in 4 years. Curiosity. Not about cattle yields or weather patterns, but about people. About the story behind those mended dresses and careful braids. About what taught children to be good at being quiet. About how a woman learned to apologize for existing before anyone even accused her. "Come on," he said, gesturing toward the house. "Let's get you settled. Chat." The blue room was larger than Eliza had dared hope, with a real bed, not a cot or a pallet, but an actual bed with a frame and a quilt that looked handmade. There was a washstand with a pitcher and basin, a dresser with a mirror, and a window that overlooked the ranch yard and the mountains beyond. This is too fine," Eliza said, standing in the doorway with Lila and Rose pressed against her sides. "Surely you've got somewhere smaller, somewhere we wouldn't be taking up." "This is the blue room," Margaret said crisply, moving past them to set a stack of towels on the dresser. "It's the guest room, which is what you are, a guest, until this situation is clarified." Eliza's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. She'd learned long ago that arguing with women like Margaret Hartley was pointless. Women who'd never known hunger or desperation or the particular terror of having nowhere to go with 2 small children depending on you. They couldn't be reasoned with. They could only be endured. "There's water in the pitcher," Margaret continued. "Supper is at 6. I'll be staying to ensure proper introductions are made. Come, Caleb." Caleb had been standing in the hallway, his large frame almost comical in the doorway's confines. He looked at Eliza with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not anger, but not warmth either. Something thoughtful. "If you need anything," he said, "kitchen's downstairs to the left. Outhouse is in back, but there's chamber pots in the dresser. The girls, they'll be all right here with you?" "Yes, sir," Eliza said. "We don't need much space. We're used to close quarters." Something flickered across his face at that. "It's a big house," he said finally. "Plenty of room to spread out." Then he was gone, following Margaret down the stairs, leaving Eliza alone with her daughters in a room that felt like a dream she'd wake from any moment. "Mama?" Rose whispered. "Are we staying?" Eliza looked down at her daughters, at their identical faces full of fragile hope, and felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle heavier. She'd gambled everything on this, sold what little they had, traveled across half the country on the promise of a mail-order marriage to a man she'd never met. The agency had assured her that widowers were often desperate enough to overlook a woman's plainness, especially if she could work. But they'd also said to be honest. And she had been. She'd written clearly about Lila and Rose, about her appearance, about her limited education, and her skill with cooking. She'd been honest about everything except the full truth of why she'd needed to leave Kansas, because some truths were too dangerous to write down. "I don't know, sweet girl," Eliza said, kneeling down to hold both daughters. "I don't know, but tonight, we've got a real bed and a roof that doesn't leak. So tonight we'll count that as blessing enough." "He was nice," Lila said softly. "Mr. Hartley. He said we could name the calf." "He did," Eliza agreed. "But people can say things and not mean them, honey. You know that." "But what if he means it?" Rose asked, and there was something in her voice. Something that sounded like hope refusing to die despite every reason it should. Eliza had no answer for that. So she just held her daughters tighter and prayed silently to a God she was no longer sure was listening, that this gamble wouldn't destroy them all. Downstairs, in the study that had been his father's and his grandfather's before that, Caleb faced his sister's fury with the patience of a man who'd weathered worse storms. "Absolutely not," Margaret said, pacing the length of the room like a lawyer presenting a case. "Send her back tomorrow. Wire the agency for a refund. This is not what was agreed upon." She says she told them about the children. Then the agency is at fault and can deal with the consequences. Caleb, be reasonable. You asked for a wife, someone to manage your household, someone presentable enough to accompany you to town functions, someone who might eventually, she waved her hand vaguely, provide heirs. Sarah didn't. Sarah had delicate health. This woman, Margaret's nose wrinkled slightly. She's clearly common stock, probably worked in kitchens or laundries all her life. And those children, who knows what kind of man fathered them? Railroad workers, she said. Do you know what sort of men work the railroads? Hard men doing dangerous work to feed their families, Caleb said quietly. Same as ranchers, near enough. It's not the same, and you know it. Margaret stopped pacing, planted her hands on the desk between them. You have a reputation to maintain, Caleb. Father built this ranch into something respectable. You've built on that foundation. What will people say when they see you've taken in some plain-faced cook with 2 children and no proper prospects? I expect they'll say whatever they were going to say anyway. Caleb leaned back in his chair, studying his sister with new eyes. When had she become so hard? Or had she always been this way and he'd simply stopped noticing? Margaret, when's the last time you asked me what I wanted? Not what Father would have wanted, not what Mother expected, not what society demands, what I actually want. I know what you want, Margaret said, but something in her voice had gone uncertain. You want what any man wants. A comfortable home, children to carry on the legacy, someone to care for you as you age. Do I? Caleb stood, moved to the window that overlooked the front yard. From here he could see the barn, the corrals, the bunkhouse, where his ranch hands lived. A dozen men worked for him, good men who respected him because he was fair and paid well, and didn't ask more than he was willing to give. But not one of them would call him friend. Not one of them really knew him. 4 years ago, he said softly. Sarah died in the bedroom upstairs. You remember that? Of course I remember. The fever took 3 days to kill her, 3 days of her struggling to breathe, burning up, slipping away. And you know what I felt? He turned to look at his sister. Guilt. Not grief, Margaret. Guilt. Because I didn't love her. Not the way a husband should love a wife. I was sad that she'd suffered. Sorry that she'd never gotten to be happy. But I didn't love her and she didn't love me, and we wasted years pretending it didn't matter. Margaret's face had gone pale. Caleb, I'm not doing that again, he said firmly. I'm not bringing someone into this house under false pretenses, not making promises I don't mean, not building another life on the foundation of duty and pretense. If Eliza Moore stays here, it'll be because we both choose it, because we're honest about what we can offer each other, not because some agency matched us on paper or because you decided it was time I remarried. She's not suitable, Margaret said, but the steel had gone out of her voice. Maybe not by your standards, Caleb agreed. But she's honest. You can see it in her eyes. She's not here to manipulate or deceive. She's desperate, yes, but she's honest about her desperation. That's more than most people manage. And the children? Caleb thought about Lila and Rose, about their careful quietness, about the way they held each other's hands like they were each other's only anchor in an uncertain world. He thought about the calf in the barn that didn't have a name yet, waiting. The children deserve better than to be treated like inconvenient baggage, he said. Whatever happens with their mother, they deserve that much. Margaret gathered her gloves and reticule with sharp, precise movements that betrayed her frustration. You're making a mistake. Maybe, Caleb said, but it'll be my mistake to make. After she left, riding back to town with her spine rigid and her disapproval radiating like heat, Caleb stood alone in the study that smelled of leather and old tobacco and watched the sun sink toward the mountains. Tomorrow he'd need to check the north pasture fences. The day after, there was a buyer coming from Cheyenne to look at his breeding stock. The ranch ran on schedules and routines, and he'd built a good life by following them. But tonight, upstairs in the blue room, 3 people were sleeping who'd turned all his routines to dust. And for the first time in 4 years, Caleb Hartley felt something stir in his chest that wasn't obligation or duty or the hollow satisfaction of a day's work completed. It felt almost like possibility. Eliza woke before dawn, a lifetime of kitchen work having trained her body to rise when darkness still pressed against the windows. For a moment she didn't remember where she was. The bed was too soft, the room too quiet, and panic seized her chest. Then Rose shifted beside her, making the small contented sound she made in sleep, and Lila's steady breathing came from the other side, and memory returned. Wyoming, the ranch, Mr. Hartley's face when he'd looked at her daughters and offered to let them name a calf, the terror that he might change his mind when daylight came. Moving carefully so as not to wake the girls, Eliza slipped from bed and dressed in the dimness. Her traveling dress smelled of dust and sweat, but it was all she had that was presentable. Later, if they stayed, if Mr. Hartley didn't send them away, she'd wash her other dress and air this one. For now, she smoothed the wrinkles as best she could and braided her hair with practiced efficiency. The house was silent as she descended the stairs, her hand trailing along a banister that gleamed even in the pre-dawn darkness. Someone polished this wood regularly, kept it beautiful despite the fact that no one was here to see it. The waste of that beauty made her chest ache. The kitchen was larger than she'd expected, with a cast-iron stove that must have cost a fortune and a work table that could seat a dozen people. Copper pots hung from hooks, their bottoms showing the kind of wear that came from use, but also careful maintenance. A man's kitchen, kept functional but not loved. Eliza lit a lamp and set to work. She found flour and lard, salt, and a crock of sourdough starter that someone had been feeding but not using. Eggs in a basket by the door, fresh enough. Bacon hanging in the larder, along with hams and preserved vegetables. Coffee beans in an airtight tin. Her hands moved with the certainty of muscle memory. Mixing biscuit dough, building a fire in the stove, slicing bacon, brewing coffee strong enough to wake the dead. This was her language, her offering. If she couldn't be beautiful, couldn't be refined or educated or any of the things that made women valuable in society's eyes, she could at least be useful. The sky was turning gray when she heard footsteps on the stairs. Caleb Hartley appeared in the kitchen doorway, half-dressed in trousers and an undershirt, his hair standing up in ways that made him look younger than his years. He stopped when he saw her, surprise clear on his face. "Mrs. Moore," he said, "you're up early." "Yes, sir." Eliza turned back to the stove, unable to meet his eyes. "Breakfast will be ready shortly. I didn't know what time you usually eat, so I thought—" "You don't have to cook," he said, and there was something gentle in his voice that made it worse somehow. Pity, maybe, or guilt about having to send them away. "Not until we've talked about arrangements." "I know, sir." She flipped the bacon with practiced efficiency. "But the girls will need feeding, and I thought you might as well see what I can do before you decide." Silence fell between them, filled only with the sizzle of bacon and the pop of the fire. Eliza could feel him watching her, and her hands wanted to shake, but she forced them steady. This was all she had to offer, this competence, this usefulness. If it wasn't enough, then nothing would be. "Coffee smells good," Caleb said finally. "It's ready if you want it." Eliza gestured toward the pot without looking at him. "Cup's in the cabinet there, I think." She heard him pour, heard him take a sip, heard the small sound of satisfaction that men made when coffee was exactly right, strong and hot, and bitter enough to chase away sleep. "Eliza," he said, and the use of her first name made her look up despite herself. He was leaning against the counter, cup cradled in his hands, studying her with those steady eyes that seemed to see more than she wanted them to. "Yesterday was a lot. For both of us, I expect. Questions that need answering." "Yes, sir. But right now, all I want to know is one thing." He paused, and she braced herself for the question she couldn't answer honestly, about her past, about the girl's father, about why she'd really left Kansas. "Do you take your coffee with anything? Sugar? Cream?" The question was so unexpected, so mundane and human, that Eliza felt something crack in her chest. "Black, sir. Always black." "Then we have that in common at least," Caleb said, and the hint of a smile touched his lips. That's a start. He poured her a cup, brought it to where she stood by the stove, and set it within reach. Their eyes met for just a moment, and in his gaze Eliza saw something she hadn't expected: kindness. Not pity, not obligation, just simple human kindness. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for breakfast," he replied. "I'll go wake the hands. They eat at 6 usually. That all right?" "Yes, sir." He started to leave, then paused in the doorway. "Eliza, stop calling me sir. My name's Caleb." Then he was gone, and Eliza was alone with her coffee and her bacon and the terrifying, fragile hope that maybe, this wouldn't end the way everything else in her life had ended. Maybe this time, someone would choose to let her stay. The ranch hands filed into the kitchen at 6 sharp, drawn by the smell of bacon and fresh biscuits like wolves to wounded prey. There were 8 of them, weathered men ranging from a kid who couldn't be more than 17 to a grizzled cowboy who looked old enough to have ridden with the first settlers. They stopped short when they saw Eliza at the stove. "Morning, boys," Caleb said from his place at the head of the table. "This is Mrs. Moore. She'll be, staying here for a time. I expect you to treat her with respect." The men mumbled greetings, eyes curious but not unkind. Eliza kept her head down, loading plates with biscuits and bacon and eggs scrambled with butter and chives she'd found in the garden. She could feel their assessment, knew what they were thinking, the same thing everyone thought when they first saw her. Not what we expected. Not pretty, probably desperate. But when she set the plates in front of them, when they took their first bites, the tenor of the room changed. "Ma'am," the youngest one said, his eyes wide, "this is the best breakfast I've had since my mama passed." "These biscuits," another added, "they're like eating clouds. How'd you get them so light?" Eliza allowed herself a small smile. "It's in the handling," she said quietly. "Work the dough too much and they go tough. Gentle hands make better biscuits." The old cowboy, Eliza would learn later his name was Hank, chuckled around a mouthful of bacon. "Boss, you better marry this one quick before someone else steals her away." The words were meant as a joke, but they landed heavy in the room. Caleb's jaw tightened slightly, and Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Eat your breakfast, Hank," Caleb said mildly, "before it gets cold and you lose the right to complain about anything for a month." The men laughed, the tension broke, and conversation turned to the day's work: cattle to move, fences to check, a windmill that needed repair. Eliza moved through the room like a ghost, refilling coffee, clearing plates, accepting compliments with quiet nods that didn't invite further conversation. She was retreating to the kitchen when Lila and Rose appeared at the bottom of the stairs, still in their nightgowns, hair sleep-tangled, eyes uncertain. The room went quiet. "Well now," Hank said softly, his weathered face transforming into something gentle. "Who do we have here?" The girls looked at Eliza, seeking permission. She nodded slightly, and Lila found her voice. "I'm Lila," she said, holding Rose's hand. "This is Rose. We're twins." "Twins?" The young cowboy, Charlie, she'd learned, grinned. "I always wanted to meet real twins. Can you read each other's minds?" "No," Lila said seriously. "That's just stories. But sometimes we know what the other one's thinking, because we pay attention." "That's better than mind reading," Charlie said. "That's being a good sister." Rose whispered something to Lila, who nodded and then spoke for both of them. "Mr. Hartley said we could name the new calf. Is she really in the barn?" "She is indeed," Hank said. "Pretty little heifer, too. Red coat just like her mama. You girls ever been around cattle before?" They shook their heads in unison. "Well then," Hank said, looking at Caleb, "reckon someone ought to give them a proper introduction. Can't have the future namers of cattle not knowing their way around a barn." Caleb had been watching this entire exchange with an expression Eliza couldn't quite read. Now he stood, wiping his mouth with a napkin that Eliza had folded carefully at each place setting. "After breakfast," he said to the girls. "If your mama says it's all right, barn tour at 8. Lila and Rose's faces lit up like lamps, and they looked at Eliza with such desperate hope that her throat tightened. "If Mr. Hartley has time," she said carefully, that would be kind." "I've got time," Caleb said, and his eyes met hers across the room. "Some things are more important than schedules." The barn smelled of hay and leather and the warm, dusty scent of cattle. Lila and Rose walked between Caleb and Hank like they'd been granted entry to a sacred place, their eyes wide, their steps cautious. Eliza followed behind, her presence tolerated but not required. Caleb had invited her along, said it would be good for the girls to have their mother nearby, but she recognized Charity when she saw it. Still, she came, because watching her daughter's faces transform from wariness to wonder was worth any amount of awkwardness. "This here's Rosie," Hank said, stopping at a stall where a massive red cow stood chewing cud with philosophical patience. "She's the mama. Best producing cow we've got. Gentle, too. Never kicks, never fusses. Just does her job and raises her babies right." "Rosie," Rose whispered, and Lila giggled. "That's your name," Lila said. "I know," Rose replied, reaching up tentatively to touch the cow's nose. "But I don't mind sharing." The calf was in the next stall, all legs and curiosity, with enormous eyes and a coat that caught the morning light like polished copper. She approached the gate when Caleb opened it, sniffing at the girls with comical intensity. "She's beautiful," Lila breathed. "She doesn't have a name yet," Caleb reminded them. "Been waiting for the right people to give her one. You girls want to think on it?" The twins looked at each other in that way they had, some silent communication passing between them. Then Lila looked up at Caleb with unexpected boldness. "Can it be any name we want?" she asked. "Or does it have to be a cow name?" "What's a cow name?" Caleb asked, genuinely curious. "Bossy," Rose supplied. "Or Bessie. Those are cow names." "Boring cow names," Lila clarified. Caleb's lips twitched. "What names are you considering?" The girls whispered together, and then Lila spoke for both. "Hope." The word hung in the barn like a prayer. "Hope," Caleb repeated softly. He looked at Eliza, and she saw him understanding. These children who'd learned to be quiet, who'd traveled across half a country on the desperate gamble of their mother's mail-order marriage, who'd arrived prepared to sleep in barn lofts and stay out of the way. They wanted to name the calf Hope. "I think that's perfect," he said, his voice rough. "Hope it is." Hank, old cowboy that he was, suddenly developed intense interest in a piece of hay on his sleeve. Eliza felt tears pressing behind her eyes and forced them back. Crying in front of these men, in front of Caleb Hartley, would only confirm what they already suspected, that she was weak, emotional, unsuitable. But Lila and Rose were radiant, petting Hope's soft nose, whispering to her about how she was beautiful and special and the best calf in all of Wyoming. Watching them, Eliza felt something in her chest that she'd been afraid to feel for 3 years. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, they'd found a place where her daughters could be children instead of burdens, where they could choose names like Hope and not be laughed at for dreaming too big. That afternoon, while the girls napped upstairs and the ranch settled into the heat-drowsy stillness of midday, Caleb finally asked the questions Eliza had been dreading. They sat in the parlor, a room that showed evidence of a woman's touch from years past, but had since faded into mere cleanliness. Eliza perched on the edge of the sofa like she might need to run at any moment. Caleb took the chair across from her, his large frame somehow both imposing and careful. "The agency," he began, "sent me 3 letters from you. In them, you mentioned being widowed. You mentioned Lila and Rose. You said you could cook and manage a household. You said you'd been working in Abilene but needed a fresh start." He paused. "What you didn't say was why you needed that fresh start, or what you're running from." Eliza's hands clenched in her lap. She'd known this was coming, had prepared answers that skirted truth without quite lying. But looking at Caleb Hartley's honest face, she found she was tired of skirting and dancing around reality. "I'm not running from the law," she said quietly. "I didn't steal anything or hurt anyone, but I am running from people who decided my daughters and I weren't good enough to exist in their town." "Tell me," Caleb said, and it wasn't a command. It was an invitation. So Eliza told him. Not everything, some wounds were too raw to expose, but enough. About her husband Jacob, a good man who worked the rail yards and died when a coupling failed and a freight car crushed him. About being left with twins not yet 3 years old and no income, no family to fall back on. About finding work in a big house on the edge of Abilene, cooking for a wealthy family, about making the mistake of being good at her job, of being visible when she should have stayed invisible. The man of the house, she said, each word careful. He took notice of me, not in a good way, started making suggestions, then demands. His wife found out, and somehow it became my fault. I was the temptress, the scheming cook trying to seduce her husband. Eliza's laugh was bitter, as if a woman like me could seduce anyone. Eliza, Caleb started, but she shook her head. I knew better than to stay. When women like his wife decide you're a threat, they make sure everyone knows it. By the time I left Abilene, I couldn't get work anywhere in town. People crossed the street to avoid me, called the girls bastards, said I was using them to trap men into marriage. Her voice had gone flat, drained of emotion. So I answered an agency advertisement, figured the frontier might be desperate enough to overlook a woman who's plain and comes with children and a reputation she didn't earn. Silence settled between them. Outside, someone was working with horses in the corral, the sound of hooves and encouraging words drifting through the open window. The agency knew all this? Caleb asked finally. I told them I'd been accused of impropriety. That it wasn't true, but that people believed it anyway. I told them I needed distance from Kansas. They said Western men were practical, that they cared more about what a woman could do than what people said about her. Eliza looked up, met his eyes. I was honest about the girls, about my appearance, about everything except the full ugliness of why I had to leave, because I was afraid if I told the whole truth, no one would take a chance on us. And if I'd known, Caleb asked, if the agency had passed along everything you'd said, would that have changed whether you came here? No, Eliza said simply, because this was our last chance. I had enough money for the journey and not much more. If you'd sent us back yesterday, she didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. Caleb stood, moved to the window, his back to her. Eliza watched his shoulders, the set of his spine, trying to read in his posture what his face might show. Disgust? Disappointment? The resigned irritation of a man who'd been trapped into doing the decent thing? My wife, Sarah, he said, still facing the window, died 4 years ago. We were married 8 years. In all that time, I don't think we had 5 honest conversations. We were polite to each other, cordial. We ran the household efficiently and presented a good face to the community, but we didn't know each other. Not really. She had secrets she never shared, and so did I, and we both pretended that was fine until it killed her. He turned then, and Eliza saw something raw in his expression. I won't do that again, he said. I won't build a life on politeness and pretense. So if you stay here, if we try to make this arrangement work, it has to be built on honesty. Not comfort, not convenience. Honesty. I understand, Eliza said, though she wasn't sure she did. Do you? Caleb crossed back to his chair, sat down heavily. Because here's my honesty, Eliza. I don't love you. Love. I don't know you well enough to love you. I don't even know if I'm capable of that kind of feeling anymore. But I don't need love. What I need is, he struggled for the word, partnership. Someone who sees this ranch, this life, as something we're building together, not as my property that you're maintaining. I can be a good partner, Eliza said quickly. I can work hard. I'm not done, Caleb said gently. The girls, Lila and Rose, if you stay, they're not guests or burdens or complications we're tolerating. They're part of this household. They name calves and take up space and make noise and ask questions. They get to be children, not perfectly behaved little ghosts trying to earn the right to exist. Eliza felt tears burning her eyes again. That's more than I dared hope for. It's less than they deserve, Caleb said. Less than any child deserves. But it's what I can promise. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. This is a business proposition, Eliza. You manage the household, cook for the hands, make this place feel lived in instead of maintained. In exchange, you and the girls have a home, security, respectability. I won't make demands on you that you're not ready for, won't expect affection you can't give. We'll figure out the rest as we go. It was the most unromantic marriage proposal Eliza had ever heard. It was also the most honest, and somehow that made it more precious than all the flowery promises that had never been kept. What about the town? She asked. Your sister made it clear I'm not suitable. People will talk. People always talk, Caleb said. Let them. This is my ranch, my house, my choice. Anyone who's got opinions about it can keep them to themselves or take them elsewhere. Eliza studied him. This broad-shouldered, quiet man who'd crouched down to talk to her daughters about naming calves, who'd poured her coffee and called it a start, who was offering partnership instead of pretending at love. He wasn't handsome in any conventional sense, but there was something solid about him, something safe. All right, she said. All right. We'll try. We'll try, Caleb agreed. And then, with the barest hint of a smile, should probably make it official. Legal, I mean. There's a minister in town. We could arrange something simple. Next week, maybe, if that suits. No fuss, Eliza said quickly. I don't need fuss. No fuss, Caleb agreed. Just legal paperwork and a couple of witnesses. Make sure you and the girls have proper standing if anything happens to me. The practicality of it should have stung. Instead, it felt like relief. No pretense of romance, no performance for an audience. Just two people making an agreement to face life together because alone was harder. Thank you, Eliza whispered. Don't thank me yet, Caleb said, but there was warmth in his voice. You haven't survived a Wyoming winter, or met the church ladies, or dealt with my sister when she's really wound up. I've survived worse, Eliza said, and meant it. Outside, the sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Somewhere upstairs, one of the girls laughed, a sound so rare and precious that both adults stopped to listen. They're good girls, Caleb said softly. The best, Eliza agreed. Then we'll make sure they stay that way, he said. Deal? Deal. And there, in a parlor that hadn't heard laughter or honest conversation in 4 years, two broken people made a bargain that might just save them both. If they were brave enough to believe in second chances, if they were willing to let hope be more than just a calf's name. The wedding happened on a Thursday morning with so little ceremony that if someone had blinked, they might have missed it entirely. The minister, a thin man named Reverend Paulson, who'd been marrying and burying frontier families for 30 years, performed the service in his small office behind the church, his words brief and functional as a carpenter hammering nails. Caleb wore his Sunday suit, brushed clean of dust but showing wear at the elbows. Eliza wore the same brown calico she'd arrived in, freshly washed and pressed, her hair pulled back in a bun that she'd redone 3 times that morning until Lila told her quietly that it looked pretty and she should stop fussing. The girls stood beside their mother in matching dresses that Eliza had sewn from fabric Caleb had brought home 2 days prior. Simple blue cotton that made their eyes look darker, more serious than any 5-year-old's eyes should look. Hank and Charlie served as witnesses, both men scrubbed clean and uncomfortable in shirts that had seen more funerals than weddings. They signed the marriage certificate with careful precision, Charlie's tongue poking out slightly as he concentrated on forming letters that would be legal and binding. By the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, Reverend Paulson intoned, I now pronounce you man and wife. Mr. Hartley, you may kiss your bride. Caleb looked at Eliza with something like apology in his eyes, then leaned down and pressed a brief, chaste kiss to her cheek, the kind of kiss you'd give a sister or a cousin, nothing that suggested passion or possession. When he pulled back, Eliza's face was flushed, but her expression remained carefully neutral. Congratulations, the Reverend said, though his tone suggested he'd said the same words 1,000 times, and meant them about as much as a man means good morning to a stranger. May your union be blessed with prosperity and godly children. Eliza's hand tightened on Rose's shoulder. Godly children. As if the twins she already had might not qualify. But Caleb's voice was firm when he responded. We've already been blessed with children, Reverend. 2 fine daughters. We'll do our best to raise them right. The Reverend's eyebrows lifted slightly, surprised, perhaps, that this quiet rancher had claimed someone else's children so readily. But he said nothing more, just handed over the marriage certificate and wished them well with the same mechanical courtesy he'd shown throughout. Outside, the November wind carried the smell of coming snow. Lila and Rose climbed into the wagon bed, settling among the blankets Eliza had packed, while Caleb helped her onto the seat with a hand that was gentle but not lingering. Mrs. Hartley, he said, and the name landed strange between them, formal and foreign, like a coat that didn't quite fit yet. Mr. Hartley, Eliza replied, matching his tone. Behind them, Hank cleared his throat. Boss, you want Charlie and me to head back to the ranch? Or you got other business in town? Caleb looked at Eliza. Anything you need while we're here? She thought about the general store, about the women who would be inside gossiping over fabric and canned goods, about the looks she'd receive as the new Mrs. Hartley, the plain mail-order bride with ready-made children who'd somehow caught one of the territory's most eligible widowers. She thought about Margaret Hartley, who surely knew by now about this rushed wedding, whose fury would be ice-cold and cutting. Nothing I need, Eliza said quietly. Then let's go home, Caleb said, and something about the way he said home, like it was a place they shared now, not just his property she inhabited, made Eliza's throat tight. The ride back to the ranch was quiet except for the girls' occasional whispered conversation and the rhythmic creak of the wagon wheels. Clouds were building over the mountains, heavy and gray, with the promise of the season's first real snow. Caleb studied them with the attention of a man who'd learned to read weather like other men read newspapers. Storm coming, he said, more to himself than to Eliza. Tonight, maybe tomorrow morning. Could be a bad one. The cattle? Eliza asked, because she'd learned enough in 2 weeks to know that cattle meant everything on a ranch, that their welfare determined whether you ate well or scraped by. We'll bring the breeding stock into the near pastures. Rest can handle themselves if it's not too fierce. He glanced at her. You ever been through a mountain snow? No, Eliza admitted. Kansas snow is different, I think, flatter. Colder here, Caleb said. Deeper. Sometimes the passes close and you're stuck for weeks. We stock the larder heavy in autumn, just in case. Eliza thought about being snowed in, about weeks with nowhere to go and no escape from the choice she'd just made. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she felt something that might have been relief. Let the snow come. Let the world narrow to this ranch, this man, these children. Let them have time to figure out what they were building before the outside world came pressing in with its judgments and expectations. I can make do, she said, even if we're snowed in for a while. Caleb nodded, seemed satisfied. Never doubted it. By the time they reached the ranch, the wind had picked up enough to make the horses nervous. Caleb unhitched the team with efficient movements while Eliza shepherded the girls inside, their new dresses already dusty from the wagon ride. The house felt different somehow, not changed physically, but weighted with new meaning. This wasn't just shelter anymore. This was home. Her home. The girls' home. The responsibility of that settled over Eliza like a yoke. In the kitchen, she built up the fire and started supper preparations while Lila and Rose sat at the table drawing pictures on scraps of paper Caleb had given them. Their quiet contentment was still so new, so fragile, that Eliza found herself watching them constantly, waiting for the moment it would shatter, for someone to tell them they were taking up too much space or making too much noise or simply existing too visibly. But the moment didn't come. The house remained peaceful. And when Caleb returned from the barn, stomping snow from his boots, even though the storm hadn't quite started yet, he smiled at the girls' drawings and asked what they'd created. This is Hope, Lila said, showing him a somewhat abstract rendering of a calf that looked more like a dog with horns. She's eating grass. That's a fine picture, Caleb said seriously. We should hang it up. Let me find a nail. He disappeared into the mudroom and returned with a hammer and a small nail, which he drove into the wall beside the kitchen window with 2 solid strikes. Then he hung Lila's drawing there, smoothing it carefully against the wall. Rose looked up at her own drawing, a house with a smoking chimney and 4 stick figures standing in front of it, and whispered something to Lila that Eliza couldn't quite hear. Mr. Hartley? Lila said. Rose wants to know if her picture can go up too. Of course, Caleb said, already reaching for another nail. Every artist deserves a gallery. And so Rose's drawing went up beside Lila's, and suddenly the kitchen that had been maintained but not loved for 4 years had children's artwork on the walls, proof of life, proof of family, proof that this house was becoming something more than just a structure where a man slept between days of work. Eliza turned back to the stove before anyone could see the tears in her eyes. Supper that night was rabbit stew with biscuits, made from a brace of cottontails that Charlie had snared that morning. The ranch hands filed in with their usual punctuality, snow beginning to fall outside in fat, lazy flakes that would turn serious by midnight. "Congratulations, boss," Hank said, settling into his usual chair. "You too, Mrs. Hartley. May your marriage be long and prosperous." The other men echoed the sentiment with varying degrees of eloquence. Eliza accepted their well wishes with quiet nods, still not quite believing this was real, that she'd gone from desperate and homeless to married and settled in the space of 2 weeks. "This stew," the young cowboy named Pete said around a mouthful, "is even better than your usual, ma'am. You put something special in it for the wedding?" "Just time from the garden," Eliza said, "and a little patience. Rabbit needs slow cooking or it goes tough." "Well, it's mighty fine," Pete said, and the others murmured agreement. Caleb ate steadily, saying little but listening to the conversation flow around him. Eliza had learned he was like that, present but quiet, taking in more than he spoke. When the meal was finished and the men had filed out into the gathering storm, he helped her clear the table without being asked, stacking plates with the careful attention of someone who'd lived alone long enough to develop his own systems. "You don't have to do that," Eliza said. "I can manage." "I know you can," Caleb replied, "but there's no law says I can't help." They worked in companionable silence, washing and drying dishes while the girls played some elaborate game involving their rag dolls and a box that had become an imaginary stagecoach. Outside, the snow was falling harder now, beginning to accumulate on the windowsills. "Storm's settling in," Caleb observed. "Could be 3 days before it clears." 3 days, Eliza repeated, testing the words. 3 days of being snowed in with this man who was now her husband-in-law, if not in fact. 3 days of learning how to exist in the same space without the buffer of routine and work to hide behind. "If that troubles you," Caleb said carefully, "there's plenty of space in this house. No need for proximity you're not comfortable with." It took Eliza a moment to understand what he was saying. Her cheeks heated. "I appreciate that." "I meant what I said before," Caleb continued, his voice low enough that the girls wouldn't hear. "About not making demands. We're partners, Eliza. Equals. This only works if we both choose it." "I know," Eliza said, though the word equals sat strange on her tongue. She'd never been anyone's equal. She'd been a daughter expected to obey, a wife expected to serve, a cook expected to remain invisible. The idea that this quiet rancher saw her as an equal, that he meant it, was almost harder to accept than if he'd simply laid out rules and expectations. That night, after those girls were tucked into bed in the blue room that was officially theirs now, after Caleb had checked the stock one final time and banked the fires for the night, Eliza stood in the hallway outside the master bedroom and felt the full weight of her new reality. She was married. Again. To a man she barely knew. A man who'd shown her nothing but kindness and respect, which somehow made it more terrifying because she didn't know when the other shoe would drop, when he'd reveal whatever darkness lived beneath that careful courtesy. "Eliza," Caleb's voice came from behind her, and she jumped. He'd come up the stairs so quietly she hadn't heard him. "You all right?" "Yes," she said automatically, then forced herself toward honesty. "No, I don't know." "Fair enough," Caleb said. He moved past her to open the door of a room she hadn't been in yet, a smaller bedroom at the end of the hall. "This was my father's room before he passed. I've been using the master bedroom since Sarah died, but I can move back in here easy enough, give you space to settle." "Caleb, you don't have to—" "I want to," he said simply. "This isn't about obligation or duty, remember? It's about choice. And I choose to make sure you're comfortable." He paused, studying her in the dim lamplight. "Unless you'd rather I stayed where I am. Your choice, Eliza. Truly." She looked at this man who kept offering her choices, who kept insisting she was equal when every experience of her life had taught her she was anything but. Part of her wanted to tell him to stay in the master bedroom, to claim the space that was his by right. But a larger part, the part that was still raw and frightened from Kansas, from accusations and shame and running, needed the buffer of separate rooms, of time to breathe. "Separate rooms," she whispered. "For now, if that's all right." "More than all right," Caleb said. "I'll move my things tomorrow. For tonight, you take the master bedroom. I'll bunk down here." "But it's your wedding night," Eliza said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. People can expect whatever they want," Caleb said, and there was steel beneath the gentleness now. "What matters is what we choose. And tonight, we're choosing to be kind to each other. Everything else can wait." He disappeared into his father's old room, leaving Eliza alone in the hallway with a lamp and a heart that didn't quite know what to do with kindness that came without conditions. The master bedroom was larger than any room Eliza had ever slept in, with a bed that could fit 4 people and a fireplace that Caleb had already laid with wood for morning. She sat on the edge of the mattress, his mattress, she reminded herself, where he'd slept alone for 4 years, and tried to understand how her life had shifted so completely in such a short time. 2 weeks ago, she'd been desperate and nearly homeless. Now she was Mrs. Caleb Hartley, mistress of a prosperous ranch, mother to daughters who were learning to laugh again. It felt like a dream or a trap. She couldn't quite decide which. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, it brought dreams of Kansas, of accusations whispered behind hands, of doors closing in her face, of Lila and Rose crying because other children had thrown rocks and called them bastards. She woke with a gasp to find dawn light filtering through curtains and the sound of the girls' voices downstairs, high and excited about something. The storm had blown itself out overnight, leaving the world transformed. Snow lay thick and pristine across the ranch yard, sculpting familiar shapes into something magical. Eliza dressed quickly and descended to find Lila and Rose pressed against the kitchen window, their breath fogging the glass. "Mama, look," Lila said. "It's so deep. Can we go outside, please?" "After breakfast," Eliza said, moving to the stove where Caleb had already started coffee. He looked up when she entered, and something passed between them. Acknowledgement of the separate rooms, of the choice they'd made, of the partnership they were building slowly, carefully, without the weight of expectations neither of them could meet. "Morning," he said. "Morning," Eliza replied. And in that simple exchange, in the ordinariness of coffee and children's excitement and snow beyond the windows, something settled. This was their life now. Not perfect, not romantic, but real. And maybe, Eliza thought as she cracked eggs into a bowl, real was better than any fantasy could be. The next 3 days unfolded with the strange intimacy that comes from being snowbound together. The ranch hands were confined to the bunkhouse except for necessary work with the animals. The family was confined to the house, learning the rhythms of each other's presence. Eliza discovered that Caleb was an early riser who moved quietly through morning routines, that he preferred his eggs scrambled rather than fried, that he read in the evenings, mostly agricultural journals and livestock reports, but sometimes poetry that seemed at odds with his practical nature. Caleb discovered that Eliza hummed while she worked, unconscious melodies that filled the kitchen with something more than just the smell of baking bread. That she was fiercely protective of the girls, but also fierce in teaching them independence, how to tie their own boots, how to clear their plates, how to say thank you and mean it. That she read to them every night from a battered copy of fairy tales, her voice transforming into different characters with a skill that suggested she'd once dreamed of being something more than a cook. Lila and Rose discovered that their new home had spaces for exploration, a library with books they could touch, an attic full of trunks and mysteries, a barn where Hope the calf waited for their visits with patient affection. They discovered that Caleb would answer their questions seriously, no matter how odd, and that he never told them to be quiet or go away or stop being underfoot. On the second evening, as wind howled outside and fire crackled in the hearth, Rose approached Caleb where he sat reading in his chair. "Mr. Hartley?" she said, her voice small but determined. "Yes, Rose? Are we supposed to call you Papa now, since you married Mama?" The question hung in the warm air of the parlor. Eliza froze at the stove where she'd been making hot chocolate, her hand tight on the pot's handle. Lila looked up from her drawing, watching with those serious eyes that saw too much. Caleb set down his journal carefully, giving the question the weight it deserved. "What would you like to call me?" Rose glanced at Lila, that silent communication passing between them again. "We never had a papa," she said finally. "Our real papa died before we were old enough to remember him. We don't know what papas are supposed to be like. Well, Caleb said slowly, I think papas are supposed to keep their children safe, feed them, teach them things, listen when they talk, be there when they need someone. He paused. Would you like me to try being that for you? A papa, I mean. Would you read us stories sometimes? Lila asked, entering the conversation with typical directness. Like Mama does? I could do that, Caleb agreed. Would you teach us about the ranch? Rose added. About cattle and horses and how to tell when snow is coming? I'd be honored to teach you those things. The twins looked at each other, then at their mother. Eliza's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but she nodded slightly. Permission, encouragement, trust. Then yes, Rose said. We'd like you to try being our papa. All right then, Caleb said, and his voice had gone rough around the edges. I'll try my best, and you can call me Papa if you want, or Caleb, or Mr. Hartley, whatever feels right to you. Papa, Lila said, testing the word. She smiled. Papa Caleb. Papa Caleb works, he agreed. And just like that, with snow falling outside and fire crackling inside and hot chocolate warming on the stove, a family that hadn't existed 2 weeks ago became something real and solid and worth fighting for. But if Eliza had learned anything in her 32 years, it was that nothing good came without a price. And she was right to worry, because the reckoning was coming faster than any of them expected. It arrived 4 days later when the roads had cleared enough for travel and Margaret Hartley rode up to the ranch in a buggy driven by her husband Thomas, a meek banker who'd learned long ago that arguing with his wife was pointless. Eliza was in the kitchen when they arrived, preparing dinner while the girls helped set the table, a task they'd taken ownership of, arranging forks and knives with careful precision. Through the window she saw Margaret's expression, saw the set of her shoulders, and felt her stomach drop. Girls, she said quietly, why don't you go upstairs and play for a while? I'll call you when dinner's ready. Lila and Rose, sensing tension with the instinct children develop when they've learned the world can turn dangerous without warning, gathered their dolls and disappeared up the stairs without argument. Eliza wiped her hands on her apron and moved to the parlor where Caleb was greeting his sister and brother-in-law with the kind of politeness that held no warmth. Margaret, Thomas, this is unexpected. Is it? Margaret said, removing her gloves with sharp, precise movements. You marry in secret, Caleb. No family present, no celebration. Just a rushed ceremony that makes it look like, well, like there were reasons for haste that no one wants to discuss. There were no such reasons, Caleb said evenly. We simply saw no point in waiting. No point? Margaret's laugh was bitter. You've been a widower for 4 years. 4 years of proper mourning, of being a respectable member of this community. And then you throw it all away on a woman you've known for 2 weeks? A woman with children and a questionable past? Margaret, Thomas's voice held warning. We discussed this. Yes, we discussed how I would be diplomatic, Margaret snapped. But I'm looking at my brother, a man who built this ranch into something to be proud of, throwing his reputation away on damaged goods, and I find I can't be diplomatic after all. Eliza had been standing in the doorway, unseen. At those words, damaged goods, she felt something inside her crack. Not break, exactly, but crack in a way that let out something that had been locked away too long. Mrs. Hartley, she said, stepping into the room. Margaret spun toward her, surprise flickering across her face. If you have accusations to make about me, I'd prefer you make them to my face, rather than discussing me like I'm furniture that offends your taste. Eliza, Caleb started, but she shook her head slightly. No, it's all right, she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. Your sister has valid concerns. She wants to protect you. I understand that. She looked directly at Margaret. You want to know what kind of woman your brother married? I'll tell you. I'm a widow who was left with 2 small children and no means to support them. I'm a woman who worked as a cook and was accused of impropriety I didn't commit. I'm someone who had to leave her home because people decided I wasn't worth defending. So you admit, Margaret began. I admit that I'm not pretty, Eliza continued, her voice gaining strength. I admit that I come with complications. I admit that I answered a mail-order bride advertisement because I was desperate and afraid and running out of options. But I don't admit to being damaged goods. I'm a human being who's had a hard life and made the best choices I could with what I had. And your brother chose to give me and my daughters a chance when no one else would. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Thomas stared at his boots. Caleb watched Eliza with an expression she couldn't read. Margaret's face had gone white, then red. "How dare you?" "Margaret, that's enough." Caleb's voice was quiet but absolute. "Eliza is my wife. Those girls upstairs are my daughters now. This is their home. And if you can't show them respect, then you're not welcome here." Margaret's eyes went wide. "Caleb, I'm your sister." "Yes," he agreed, "and I love you. But I won't have you coming into my home and speaking to my wife like she's something shameful I should hide. Eliza has done nothing wrong. She's been honest with me about her circumstances, more honest than most people manage. And she's made this house feel like a home again. That's worth more than all the society approval in the territory." "The town will talk," Margaret said, her voice breaking slightly. "They're already talking. About how fast you married her, about those children, about—" "Let them talk," Caleb said. "I spent 4 years being respectable and proper and doing everything society expected. And you know what it got me? A loveless marriage and a house that felt like a tomb. I'm done living for other people's approval." Thomas cleared his throat. "Margaret, perhaps we should—" "Fine," Margaret said, snatching up her gloves. "Fine. Throw away everything father built. Marry beneath yourself. Raise someone else's children. But don't come crying to me when this all falls apart." She swept toward the door, Thomas trailing apologetically behind her. At the threshold, she paused, looked back at Caleb with something that might have been grief beneath the anger. "I hope she's worth it," Margaret said. "I truly do." Then they were gone, buggy wheels crunching on snow, leaving silence in their wake. Eliza stood frozen in the parlor, her hands clenched in her apron, trying to process what had just happened. Caleb had defended her, had called the girls his daughters, had chosen her over his sister's approval without hesitation. "Caleb, she started, but couldn't finish because her throat had closed around words too big to speak. He crossed the room, and for a moment Eliza thought he might embrace her. Instead, he stopped a respectful distance away, his expression gentle. "You stood up for yourself," he said. "I'm proud of you for that." "I shouldn't have," Eliza whispered. "I should have stayed quiet, let you handle it, been—" "Invisible?" Caleb finished. "Is that what you were going to say? That you should have been invisible?" Eliza nodded miserably. "No," Caleb said firmly. "No more being invisible, Eliza. You're my wife now. You're part of this family. You have every right to speak up when someone treats you poorly." He paused. "Margaret will come around eventually. Or she won't. But either way, she doesn't get to decide how we live our lives." From upstairs came the sound of footsteps, Lila and Rose probably listening at the top of the stairs. Caleb glanced up, then back at Eliza. "Girls," he called. "Dinner almost ready?" 2 small faces appeared over the banister. "Yes, Papa," they said in unison. "Then come help me set an extra place. We should celebrate." "Celebrate what?" Lila asked, descending the stairs with Rose behind her. "Your mama," Caleb said, "standing up for this family. That's worth celebrating." The girls looked at Eliza with something like awe, and she felt tears finally spill over. But they weren't tears of shame or fear. They were something else entirely, something that felt almost like pride. That night, after dinner had been eaten and dishes washed, after the girls had been read to and tucked in with kisses and promises of more snow adventures tomorrow, Eliza found herself once again in the hallway outside the master bedroom. But this time, when Caleb came up the stairs, she didn't retreat. She waited. "Thank you," she said when he reached the landing, "for what you said to your sister, for defending us." "You're my family now," Caleb said simply. "That's what family does." "Is it?" Eliza asked, because in her experience, family was something that demanded and took, that used obligation as a weapon and love as a chain. "It should be," Caleb said. "Maybe neither of us had that growing up. Maybe we're both figuring this out as we go. But I think family means choosing each other day after day, choosing to show up, choosing to be kind, choosing to fight for each other when the world gets hard." Eliza looked at this man, this unexpected, gentle, honest man, and felt something shift in her chest. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of love, the maybe of it. "I'd like to try," she whispered. "Choosing each other, choosing this." "So would I," Caleb said, and then, with a small smile, "One day at a time. No rush. Just trying." "Just trying," Eliza echoed. And somehow, in the quiet of that snow-muffled night, with children sleeping safe and sound, and a man who kept choosing kindness, just trying felt like more than enough. It felt like hope. Winter deepened across the Wyoming territory with the kind of cold that turned breath to ice and made even the hardiest ranchers think twice before stepping outside. But inside the Hartley house, something was thawing. It happened in small moments, accumulating like snow on a roof until the weight of them changed the very structure beneath. Eliza would catch Caleb watching her as she kneaded bread, his expression thoughtful rather than critical. Caleb would find his coffee poured exactly how he liked it, steam rising in the pre-dawn darkness, Eliza's way of saying good morning without words. The girls would run to him when he came in from the cold, their trust in him growing deeper each day until it became as natural as breathing. 3 weeks after Margaret's visit, a different visitor arrived. Eliza was teaching the girls their letters at the kitchen table when she heard the wagon, looked up to see a woman she didn't recognize climbing down with the careful movements of someone carrying precious cargo. She was younger than Eliza, perhaps 25, with blonde hair and a pretty face that couldn't quite hide the fear in her eyes. Behind her, a man Eliza did recognize, Reverend Paulson, helped unload a worn trunk and a carpet bag that looked like it had seen better days. "Mrs. Hartley?" the Reverend called toward the house. "Might I have a word?" Eliza wiped her hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch, aware of the girls following and peering around her skirts. The blonde woman stood beside her luggage, looking like she might bolt at any moment, her gaze darting between the house and the mountains as if calculating escape routes. "Reverend," Eliza said carefully, "what brings you out in this cold?" "A matter of some delicacy," Paulson said, glancing at the woman beside him. "This is Miss Sarah Brennan, Mrs. Brennan, I should say. Widow. She arrived on yesterday's stage from Illinois. Arranged marriage to a rancher named Jack Denton. You know him?" Eliza knew the name. Denton ran cattle on the eastern edge of the territory, had a reputation for drinking too much and losing his temper faster. She nodded slowly. "Well," Paulson continued, his discomfort evident, "Mr. Denton came to collect his bride this morning. Took one look at her and said she wasn't pretty enough for what he'd paid the agency. Refused to honor the arrangement. Left her standing in front of the church with nowhere to go." The words hit Eliza like a physical blow. She looked at Sarah Brennan, at this woman who'd traveled halfway across the country on the promise of marriage and security, only to be rejected for the crime of not being pretty enough, and saw herself. Saw what would have happened if Caleb had been like Jack Denton. Saw the knife's edge she'd walked when she stepped off that stagecoach. "I see," Eliza said quietly. "I've been to the hotel, to several homes in town," Paulson said. "No one wants to take in a woman with no prospects and no references. I thought perhaps, given your own circumstances, you might understand her situation." It was delicately phrased, but the meaning was clear. "You were desperate once, too. Surely you'll help." Eliza looked at Sarah Brennan's face, at the shame written there, at the way she was trying so hard not to cry in front of strangers. She thought about what Caleb had said about family, about choosing to show up, about fighting for each other when the world got hard. "Come inside," Eliza said. "Both of you. I'll put coffee on." Sarah's head snapped up, hope and disbelief warring in her expression. You'd help me? But you don't even know me." "No," Eliza agreed. "But I know what it feels like to be alone and afraid with no place to go. Come on now, before you freeze." Inside, Sarah sat at the kitchen table like she was afraid to fully settle, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup as if drawing warmth from more than just the heat. The girls had retreated to their dolls, but kept glancing at the pretty stranger with undisguised curiosity. "How long were you traveling?" Eliza asked, setting out bread and butter because feeding people was the only comfort she knew how to give. 3 weeks, Sarah said. Her voice was soft, cultured in a way that suggested education somewhere in her past. "I left Chicago when when my circumstances changed. Family? Eliza prompted gently. Dead. Parents, both. I was keeping house for my brother, but then he married and his wife. Sarah's jaw tightened. She made it clear I wasn't welcome. I had a little money saved, enough for the journey and the agency fee. I thought the frontier would be different, that men here would value work over appearances. Some do, Eliza said. Some don't. Jack Denton is a fool. A ghost of a smile touched Sarah's lips. That's kind of you to say. It's the truth, Eliza said firmly. She poured more coffee, thinking about what to do. The house had space, plenty of it. But taking in a stranger, even one in desperate circumstances, wasn't a decision she could make alone. This was Caleb's home too, his ranch, his reputation that would be affected by sheltering a woman society deemed problematic. As if summoned by her thoughts, she heard the front door open, heard Caleb's boots on the floor as he stamped snow from them. He appeared in the kitchen doorway and stopped, taking in the scene. Eliza, the Reverend, the strange woman at his table. Caleb, Eliza said, standing. This is Mrs. Sarah Brennan. She arrived yesterday for a marriage arrangement that didn't work out. Reverend Paulson brought her here because she has nowhere else to go. She watched his face carefully, looking for signs of irritation or suspicion or the kind of calculated rejection that Sarah had already endured once today. But Caleb just studied the young woman with the same thoughtful attention he gave everything, then looked at Eliza. What do you think? He asked. The question startled her. Not what should we do? Not what he thought. What did she think? I think we have space, Eliza said carefully. I think winter's hard and being alone is harder. I think... She paused, choosing words. I think if someone had turned me away when I arrived, I don't know what would have happened to the girls and me. Caleb nodded slowly, then addressed Sarah directly. You're welcome to stay, Mrs. Brennan. We've got a room upstairs, warm and dry. You can help Eliza with the household if you're willing. Earn your keep that way until you figure out what comes next. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I can't pay you. I spent everything I had on the journey. Didn't ask you to pay, Caleb said. Asked if you were willing to work. Yes, Sarah said quickly. Yes, I can work. I can cook, clean, sew, keep books if needed. I had some schooling. I can read and write and figure. Whatever you need, I'll do it. Then it's settled, Caleb said. He looked at Reverend Paulson. Anything else? The Reverend looked between them with something like wonder. No, I think that covers it. Mrs. Hartley, Mr. Hartley, this is a kindness that won't be forgotten. After Paulson left, Eliza showed Sarah to the green room, smaller than the blue room where the girls slept, but still more space than Sarah had probably expected. The young woman stood in the doorway, looking overwhelmed. I don't understand, she whispered. Why would you help me? You don't know anything about me. I know enough, Eliza said. I know you came here hoping for something better and got cruelty instead. I know you're scared and alone. That's enough. But people will talk, Sarah said, about your husband taking in another woman. They'll say terrible things. Eliza thought about Margaret, about the town gossip that had surely already started about the mail-order bride with children who'd somehow caught Caleb Hartley, about how adding another woman to the household would fuel speculation and judgment. Let them talk, she said, echoing Caleb's words from weeks ago. This is our home, our choice. That night, after Sarah had been fed and settled and the girls put to bed, Eliza found Caleb in the barn checking on the horses. He looked up when she entered, lantern light casting shadows across his face. Thank you, she said, for letting her stay, for not making me choose between kindness and keeping peace. Why would I make you choose? Caleb asked, genuinely confused. Most men would, Eliza said. Most men would worry about appearances, about what people might say, about the burden of another mouth to feed. We've got plenty of food, Caleb said practically, and I don't care much what people say. Never have. He paused, studying her. You care, though, about what they say. I've spent my whole life caring, Eliza admitted, trying to be small enough, quiet enough, useful enough that no one would have cause to complain about me, and it never mattered. They complained anyway. Then stop trying, Caleb said. Stop making yourself small. You're allowed to take up space, Eliza. You're allowed to make choices and have opinions and help people who need helping. Even when it complicates things? Especially then, Caleb said. The easy thing would have been turning her away. But you didn't. You chose kindness instead. That matters more than convenience. Eliza felt something in her chest expand, some tight band she'd worn so long she'd forgotten it was there, loosening just slightly. How did you get to be this way? She asked. This decent? Caleb's laugh was short and humorless. I'm not sure I am. I spent 4 years being decent to Sarah, my first wife. And it didn't save her. Didn't make either of us happy. Maybe I'm just tired of doing what's expected instead of what's right. What's right isn't always clear, Eliza said. No, Caleb agreed. But I think we know it when we see it. And turning away a frightened woman in winter, that wouldn't have been right. They stood in comfortable silence, listening to the horses shift and breathe, the barn warm with animal heat despite the cold pressing against the walls. Finally, Eliza spoke again, her voice softer. The girls asked me something tonight, after Sarah went upstairs. What's that? They asked if we were building a family for broken people, people no one else wanted. Eliza's throat tightened. They said maybe that's what makes a family good, when it's built from people who know what it's like to not fit anywhere else. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. What did you tell them? I told them yes, Eliza said, that maybe the best families are the ones people choose to build, not the ones they're born into. That being wanted matters more than being perfect. That's the truth of it, Caleb said. He turned to face her fully, and in the lantern light his eyes were serious. You know what I see when I look at this ranch now? I see children laughing. I see meals that taste like someone cares. I see a woman upstairs who'll sleep safe tonight because someone chose to help instead of turn away. That's worth more than any perfect reputation could ever be. Eliza couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She just nodded, and when Caleb reached out and squeezed her shoulder briefly, a gesture of solidarity, of partnership, she didn't flinch away. Sarah Brennan proved to be exactly what she'd promised. She worked tirelessly, helping Eliza with the endless tasks of running a household for a dozen people, cooking, cleaning, mending, preserving. She was quiet but not timid, educated but not proud, grateful but not obsequious. Within days, she'd become essential to the rhythm of the house. But more than that, she became a friend. It started small. A shared pot of tea after the dinner dishes were done. A quiet conversation while mending shirts by the fire. Sarah's admission that she'd never expected to end up on the frontier, that she'd dreamed once of being a teacher, but that women with no family connections rarely got such positions. I thought marriage would be simpler, Sarah said one evening, her needle flashing in the lamplight. Meet a man who needed a wife, make a home, raise children eventually. Straightforward. Nothing about life is straightforward, Eliza said, working on one of Rose's dresses that had torn at the hem, especially not marriage. Yours seems... Sarah paused, choosing words carefully. Content. You and Mr. Hartley. Content together. Eliza considered lying, maintaining the fiction that her marriage was like any other, but something about Sarah's honesty invited the same in return. We're partners, she said finally. Building something together. It's not romance like in books, but it's real. And it's kind. That's more than most people get. Do you think you'll ever love him? Sarah asked, then flushed. I'm sorry, that's terribly forward. No, it's all right, Eliza said. She thought about Caleb, about the way he listened when she spoke, the way he'd defended her to Margaret, the way he treated the girls like they'd always been his daughters. I think maybe I already do, just not the way I expected love to feel. It's quieter than I thought it would be. Steadier. That sounds nice, Sarah said wistfully. Steady. 2 weeks into Sarah's stay, Eliza made a discovery that would shift everything. She was in the attic searching for extra quilts when she found a trunk she'd never opened, tucked beneath the eaves in a corner where dust lay thick. Inside were dresses, beautiful dresses in fabrics that would have cost a fortune. Silks and velvets, lace and fine wool, all in sizes that would fit women of substance, Women with curves society deemed improper. At the bottom of the trunk was a journal. Eliza knew she shouldn't read it, knew it was an invasion of privacy. But her hands opened it anyway, and there on the first page was written in careful script, "Property of Sarah Hartley, Caleb's first wife." This trunk held her things. Eliza should have closed it then, should have respected the dead woman's privacy. But something compelled her to read, and what she found shattered her assumptions about the marriage that had come before hers. Sarah Hartley had been ill, yes, but the illness wasn't the delicate constitution Margaret had implied. It was grief. Entry after entry spoke of a woman trapped in a marriage to a man who was kind but distant, who treated her courteously but never loved her, who'd married her because it was expected, because their families wanted the union, because duty demanded it. "I am dying of loneliness in a house full of people," one entry read. "Caleb is good to me, patient, respectful, and it makes it worse somehow, knowing he tries so hard to be decent when he feels nothing. I would rather he be cruel. At least then I could hate him, instead of pitying us both." Eliza closed the journal with shaking hands. She thought about Caleb saying he'd felt guilt rather than grief when Sarah died, about his determination not to build another marriage on pretense and duty. She thought about how he'd offered her partnership instead of promising love, how he'd been honest about his limitations. He'd learned, from the failure of his first marriage, from watching a woman slowly suffocate in the prison of politeness and duty, he'd learned what not to do. That evening, while Sarah read to the girls upstairs and Caleb worked on ranch accounts in his study, Eliza knocked softly on the doorframe. "Busy?" she asked. "Never too busy," Caleb said, setting down his pen. "Something wrong?" "No, I found something today, in the attic." She came into the room, closed the door behind her. "A trunk. It belonged to your first wife." Caleb's expression shuddered slightly. "I should have moved that. Didn't think about it when you arrived. I read her journal," Eliza interrupted. "I know I shouldn't have. It was private, but I did. And now I understand something I didn't before." "Eliza, you don't have to—" "She was lonely," Eliza said softly. "Not just lonely, dying of it. And you knew, didn't you? You saw it happening and couldn't stop it because you didn't know how to give her what she needed." Caleb's jaw worked. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I tried to be what she needed. But I didn't love her, couldn't force myself to feel what wasn't there. And she knew, and it killed her slower than any fever could have. "That's why you were so honest with me," Eliza said, understanding blooming. "Why you offered partnership instead of pretending at romance. You didn't want to trap either of us in another marriage of polite lies." "I couldn't do it again," Caleb said. Couldn't watch someone fade away because I couldn't be what they needed. Better to be honest from the start, even if it meant you might refuse." Eliza crossed the room, sat in the chair across from his desk. "What if I told you that what you're offering, partnership, honesty, kindness, is exactly what I need? That I'm not fading in this marriage, Caleb. I'm growing." He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw hope warring with fear in his expression. "Are you? Growing?" "Yes," Eliza said. "For the first time in years, I feel like I'm allowed to take up space, to have opinions, to make choices." "You did that, by treating me like an equal instead of a servant or an obligation." "You are an equal," Caleb said firmly. "You've made this house a home. You've given me daughters who laugh and ask questions and aren't afraid. You've shown more courage in 2 months than most people show in a lifetime. How could you be anything but equal?" The words settled between them, honest and raw. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes, but didn't look away. "I think I love you," she said. Not the desperate love of someone who needs rescuing, not the grateful love of someone who owes a debt, just love, the real kind. The kind that grows slow and steady until one day you realize it's been there all along. Caleb stood slowly, came around the desk. He knelt beside her chair so they were eye level and took her hands in his, gentle, questioning, giving her every chance to pull away. "I love you too," he said. "Have for weeks now. Didn't know how to say it without making you feel obligated or uncomfortable. Didn't want to rush you into anything you weren't ready for." "I'm ready," Eliza whispered. "I'm ready to be your wife in truth. Not just on paper. In every way. Caleb's thumb traced circles on her palm. Are you sure? There's no rush. We can keep going as we have been. I'm sure, Eliza said. I'm sure because this isn't about duty or desperation. It's about choosing you, choosing us, choosing to build something real together. He stood then and drew her up with him, and when he kissed her, it wasn't the brief, chaste kiss of their wedding day. It was real and deep and full of all the words they'd been too afraid to speak. It was a promise and a beginning, and the acknowledgement that something between them had shifted irrevocably from partnership to something far more profound. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. The separate bedrooms, he said. We don't have to. I know, Eliza said, but I want to. I want to sleep beside you. Wake up beside you. Build a real marriage, Caleb. The kind your first wife deserved but never got. The kind we both deserve. Then that's what we'll do, Caleb said, one day at a time, together. But their moment of peace was short-lived. 3 days later, during one of the first warm spells that hinted at coming spring, a writer arrived bearing news that would test everything they'd built. His name was Robert Fletcher, and he was a lawyer from Abilene, Kansas. He sat in the Hartley parlor with a leather satchel and an expression that was professionally neutral but couldn't quite hide distaste. Mrs. Hartley, he said, addressing Eliza with the kind of formality that felt like an insult. I've been retained by the estate of Harrison Whitmore to locate you and deliver certain communications. Eliza felt her blood turn to ice. Harrison Whitmore, the man whose house she'd worked in, the man who'd made suggestions and then demands, the man whose wife had destroyed her reputation rather than admit her husband was a predator. What communications? Caleb asked when Eliza couldn't speak. Fletcher pulled papers from his satchel. Mr. Whitmore passed away 2 months ago. Heart failure, the doctor said. In his final weeks, he made certain confessions to his attorney regarding his conduct toward Mrs. Hartley during her employment. Confessions, Eliza repeated numbly. He admitted to making unwanted advances, Fletcher said, each word careful and legal. To threatening your employment if you didn't comply. To allowing his wife to destroy your reputation when you refused him. His attorney advised him to make amends before he died. Hence, this letter. He held out an envelope. Eliza stared at it like it might bite. What kind of amends? Caleb asked, his voice dangerous quiet. Financial compensation, Fletcher said. $500. An assigned statement admitting his culpability, exonerating Mrs. Hartley of all accusations of impropriety. The statement has been filed with the county clerk in Abilene and with the church where the Whitmores attended. Anyone who wishes to verify the truth need only inquire. $500. More money than Eliza had ever seen at one time. And vindication, proof that she'd been telling the truth, that she hadn't been a schemer or a temptress or any of the things she'd been called. But the cost of that vindication had been years of her life. Years of running and hiding and believing herself damaged beyond repair. I don't want his money, Eliza said, her voice shaking. I don't want anything from him. Eliza, Caleb said gently, think about this. I don't need to think, she said, standing abruptly. That money is guilt and shame wrapped in legal paper. It won't change what happened, won't give me back the years I lost, or erase the things people said about me. No, Fletcher agreed, but it might help you build a future. Help your daughters. At the mention of the girls, Eliza paused. Lila and Rose, who deserved every opportunity Eliza could give them. $500 could mean education, dowries, security. Take it, Caleb said quietly. Not for him, not as forgiveness. Take it because you earned it through suffering and survival. Because he owed you more than money could ever repay, and this is the least he could do. Eliza looked at her husband, at this man who understood that justice wasn't always satisfying, that vindication could taste bitter even when it was deserved. She nodded once, sharp. Fine, she said. I'll take it. For the girls. Fletcher produced more papers, had her sign acknowledgement of receipt. Then he was gone, riding back toward town with his legal satchel and his professional neutrality, leaving Eliza holding proof that she'd been telling the truth all along. She should have felt triumph, relief, something. Instead, she just felt tired. That night, with Caleb holding her close in the bed they now shared, Eliza finally let herself cry. Not delicate tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place she'd locked away for years. "It doesn't fix anything," she gasped against his chest. "The truth coming out now, it doesn't fix what already happened." "No," Caleb agreed, his hand steady on her back. "But it means you don't have to carry the lie anymore. It means your daughters will grow up knowing their mother was wronged, not wrong. That's something, Eliza. That's not nothing." "I wanted him to suffer," Eliza admitted, "the way he made me suffer. I wanted him to lose everything like I did." "I know," Caleb said. "That's human. That's allowed." "Is it?" Eliza pulled back to look at him. "Am I allowed to be angry, to want revenge even though he's already dead?" "Yes," Caleb said firmly. "You're allowed to feel whatever you feel. Anger, grief, relief, nothing. All of it's valid. All of it's yours." Eliza collapsed against him again, letting his steadiness anchor her as the storm of emotion worked through her system. Eventually the tears stopped. Eventually her breathing steadied. Eventually she slept, and for the first time in years she didn't dream of running. The next morning, Eliza gathered Sarah and the girls in the kitchen and told them about the lawyer's visit, about the confession and the money and the vindication that had come too late to undo the damage, but not too late to matter. "You were telling the truth all along," Sarah said, something fierce in her voice. "Everyone who called you names, who crossed the street to avoid you, they were wrong." "They were," Eliza agreed, "but knowing that doesn't make it hurt less." "What will you do with the money?" Sarah asked. Eliza looked at Lila and Rose, at their serious faces as they tried to understand adult complications. "I'm going to save most of it, for their futures. For education or dowries or whatever they need when they're grown. But part of it," she paused, an idea forming, "part of it I want to use to help other women. Women like us. Women who arrive in Wyoming desperate and alone." "How?" Caleb asked. He'd been listening from the doorway, coffee in hand. "I don't know yet," Eliza admitted. "But there has to be a way. Sarah needed help and found it here by chance. How many others are there who aren't so lucky, who get turned away and have nowhere to go?" "You're thinking of starting something," Caleb said. "A charity? A shelter?" "Maybe," Eliza said. "Is that foolish?" "No," Caleb said. "It's generous. It's brave. And it sounds like exactly the kind of thing you should do." So began the planning, the dreaming, the slow, careful work of turning pain into purpose. And if Eliza sometimes woke in the night still angry, still grieving, still wishing the past could be different, well, she had Caleb beside her now. Had daughters who trusted her. Had a friend in Sarah and a home that was truly hers. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And real, Eliza was learning, was better than any fairy tale could ever be. Spring arrived in Wyoming the way it always did, slowly, stubbornly, fighting winter for every inch of ground. The snow retreated up the mountainsides, leaving behind mud and the first brave shoots of green grass. The cattle grew restless in their winter pastures, ready for open range. And in the Hartley household, plans that had been germinating through the cold months finally began to take root. Eliza stood in what had once been a storage room on the second floor, mentally cataloging what would need to be done. The space was large enough for 2 beds, maybe 3 if they were careful about arrangement. The window faced south, which meant good light. The walls would need fresh paint, the floor a thorough scrubbing, but the bones were solid. "You're really doing this," Sarah said from the doorway. She'd been watching Eliza with a mixture of admiration and concern for the past 20 minutes. "I am," Eliza confirmed. "The money from Whitmore's estate, it feels tainted somehow. Using it to help other women, that makes it mean something different, something good." "The town won't like it," Sarah warned. "A house that takes in desperate women? They'll say you're running a refuge for fallen women. They'll call it worse things than that." "Let them," Eliza said, and realized she meant it. The old Eliza, the one who'd arrived on that stagecoach 5 months ago, would have been terrified of town gossip. But she'd survived worse than gossip. She'd survived accusations and exile, and the particular terror of having nowhere to go with 2 small children depending on her. If her survival could mean other women didn't have to face that same terror alone, then whatever the town said didn't matter. "How many do you think you can take?" Sarah asked, moving into the room to test the floorboards with her foot. 2 or 3 at a time, maybe, Eliza said. Enough to help, but not so many we can't give each woman real attention. They'll need more than just a bed. They'll need help finding work, making plans, figuring out what comes next. You're talking about weeks, not days, Sarah observed. Yes, Eliza agreed. I'm talking about giving them time to breathe, to heal, to make decisions that aren't driven by pure desperation. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then spoke softly. You're giving them what you wished you'd had. I had Caleb, Eliza said. I had luck and a man who chose kindness over judgment. Not everyone will have that. So yes, I suppose I'm trying to be for them what Caleb was for me. And what I was for you, Sarah asked, a small smile playing at her lips. Eliza crossed to her friend, took her hands. You've been more help than you know. Not just with the work, but with being someone who understands, who doesn't judge, who knows what it feels like to arrive somewhere desperate and afraid. I'm staying, Sarah said suddenly. Not just for a few more weeks until I figure something out. I want to stay and help with this, with the women who'll come. If you'll have me. Sarah, I mean it, Sarah insisted. I've been thinking about what comes next for me, about finding another teaching position or trying another mail order arrangement. But the truth is, I don't want to leave. I want to be part of what you're building here, a place where women can be safe and valued regardless of whether they're pretty or have perfect histories or fit society's narrow definition of acceptable. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. You're sure it won't be easy? People will talk about you too, living here unmarried, helping with this work. I'm already someone people talk about, Sarah said practically. The bride who got rejected, who lives with the Hartleys in some scandalous arrangement, might as well give them something real to gossip about while we do actual good. Then, yes, Eliza said, pulling Sarah into a fierce hug. Yes, please stay. I can't think of anyone I'd rather have beside me in this. When Caleb came in from the range that evening, covered in the dust and sweat of spring cattle work, he found his house transformed into a planning center. Eliza and Sarah had papers spread across the dining table, lists of supplies needed, rough budgets, notes about local merchants who might donate materials or offer fair prices. Looks serious, he observed, washing his hands at the kitchen pump. It is serious, Eliza said, looking up with the kind of determined expression he'd come to recognize. It meant she'd made a decision, and nothing would change her mind. We're making the refuge real. Sarah's staying to help. We think we can be ready to take in our first woman by summer. Caleb dried his hands carefully, studying the papers. You'll need to register it properly. Make it legal, so if anyone questions what you're doing, you've got documents to point to. I hadn't thought of that, Eliza admitted. I have, Caleb said. Been thinking about it since you first mentioned the idea. There's a lawyer in Cheyenne, good man, fair, who handles charitable incorporations. I could write to him, get the process started. Eliza stood, crossed to where he was standing. Even after months of marriage, she still sometimes marveled at his casual support, his assumption that her dreams were worth his time and resources. This is going to cost money, she said, more than just the Whitmore payment. Paint and lumber and food for extra mouths, and it's going to bring attention to this house that you might not want. I've got money, Caleb said. Ranch has been profitable for years. I've got more than I need. Might as well use it for something that matters. He paused. As for attention, Eliza, when have I ever cared what people think? Your sister will be furious, Eliza warned. My sister's always furious about something, Caleb said mildly. At least this time it'll be about something worthwhile. He was right about Margaret. She arrived 2 days later with all the force of a spring thunderstorm, her face tight with the kind of anger that came from hearing news secondhand and having time to work herself into a fury about it. A refuge, she said, the word dripping with disgust. You're turning your home into a refuge for wayward women. Do you have any idea what people are saying? I can imagine, Caleb said. They were in the parlor, the door closed to keep the girls from hearing. Eliza sat beside Caleb on the sofa, a united front. But I don't much care. Of course you don't, Margaret snapped. You never cared about reputation or propriety or the family name. But I do, Caleb. I have children to think about. How am I supposed to hold my head up in town when my brother is running a house of ill repute? It's not a house of ill repute, Eliza said quietly. It's a place where women who've been left desperate can find shelter and support while they figure out their next steps. Women like I was when I arrived. Women like Sarah. Sarah Brennan is exactly my point, Margaret said. A woman jilted by a decent rancher because she didn't meet expectations. Now living here unmarried, encouraging this ridiculous charity scheme. It's scandal on top of scandal. Sarah was rejected by a drunk who values appearance over character, Caleb corrected. And she's doing valuable work here, as is Eliza. Valuable work, Margaret repeated bitterly. Caleb, you're a rancher. Your wife should be managing your household, raising your children, supporting your position in the community, not starting some radical social experiment that makes you both look like fools. The household runs fine, Caleb said. Better than fine. The girls are happy and healthy. The ranch is profitable. What exactly am I sacrificing by supporting my wife's charitable work? Your standing, Margaret said. Your reputation, the respect of your peers. If my peers' respect depends on me turning away desperate women, then I don't want it, Caleb said flatly. Margaret turned to Eliza, her eyes hard. This is your doing. You've turned him against his own family, against everything our father built. That's enough, Caleb said, standing. You will not speak to my wife that way in my house. Eliza has done nothing but improve my life and the lives of everyone around her. If you can't see that, can't support what we're trying to do, then you're not welcome here. The words hung in the air like smoke. Margaret's face went white, then red. You're choosing her over me, she said, her voice breaking slightly. Your own sister. I'm choosing to build something good, Caleb said. I'm choosing to use what I have to help people who need helping. I'm choosing my wife and my marriage and my values over your narrow view of respectability. If you want to call that choosing her over you, that's your right, but it doesn't change my decision. Margaret gathered her gloves and reticule with shaking hands. At the door, she paused. Father would be ashamed. Father married Mother because it merged two profitable ranches, Caleb said quietly. They were miserable together for 40 years. He drank himself to death because he couldn't face the emptiness of his own house. So no, Margaret, I don't think he'd be ashamed. I think he'd be envious that I found something real. After Margaret left, the silence in the parlor felt heavy. Eliza reached for Caleb's hand, found it trembling slightly. I'm sorry, she whispered. Don't be, Caleb said. She'll come around or she won't. But I meant what I said, every word. Well, even the part about your father? Especially that part, Caleb said. He turned to face her fully. I spent my first marriage repeating his mistakes. Duty over feeling, appearance over truth. I won't do it again. Whatever we're building here, it's built on something real. Something that matters. Margaret can accept that or not. Her choice. The first woman to seek refuge at the Hartley house arrived on a Tuesday in late May. Her name was Catherine Wells, and she came with nothing but the clothes on her back and a black eye that was healing from purple to yellow-green. She stood on the porch looking like she might run at any moment, her hands clenched in her skirts. Eliza, who'd been alerted by the ranch hand who'd seen her walking up the road, came to the door with Sarah beside her. Mrs. Wells, Eliza said gently, we've been expecting you. Catherine's eyes widened. You have? Reverend Paulson sent word you might be coming, said you needed a safe place for a while. My husband, Catherine said, then stopped, started again. My husband drinks. When he drinks, he gets angry. Usually I can manage, but last week she gestured to her eye. I left, took what I could carry and left. The Reverend said you might help. Come in, Eliza said. You're safe here. Catherine followed them inside, her eyes darting around like she was cataloging escape routes. When Lila and Rose appeared from the kitchen, curious about the visitor, Catherine tensed. It's all right, Sarah said quietly. The children live here. They're sweet girls. They won't hurt you. I have children, Catherine whispered. 2 boys. They're with my sister. I couldn't bring them. He'd look for them. But I couldn't leave them with him either, not after... She swallowed hard. Is that wrong? Leaving them? No, Eliza said firmly. You're protecting them, Getting yourself safe first so you can figure out how to get them safe too. That's not wrong. That's survival. Catherine's face crumpled. I didn't know where else to go. I don't have money. I can't pay you. We're not asking for payment, Eliza said, just for you to rest and heal while we figure out what comes next. Can you do that? I don't know, Catherine admitted. I don't know if I remember how to rest. Then we'll teach you, Sarah said, taking Catherine's arm gently. Come on, let's get you settled. There's hot water for washing and clean clothes if you need them. When's the last time you ate? As Sarah led Catherine upstairs, Eliza caught Caleb watching from the study doorway. Their eyes met, and he nodded slightly. Acknowledgement, support, partnership. This was what they'd planned for. The work was beginning. Over the next weeks, Catherine's story emerged in fragments. A husband who'd been kind when sober, but that kindness grew rare as his drinking increased. Years of walking on eggshells, of managing his moods, of protecting the boys from the worst of it. The final violence that had driven her to flee, and the terrible choice she'd made to leave her sons with her sister rather than risk her husband finding them through her. I need to get them back, Catherine said one evening. She was helping Eliza with dinner, her hands steady with the kind of work that gave purpose. But I can't do that without money, without a plan, without being stronger than I am right now. Then we'll work on getting you stronger, Eliza said. Sarah's been teaching you to read better, hasn't she? Yes, Catherine said. I can manage basic reading, but she's helping me with more. Says if I can read and write well, I might find work as a clerk or in a shop. That's good, Eliza said. And we'll help you save money. You work here, you get wages. Not much, but enough to start building something. When you're ready, when you're strong enough, we'll help you get your boys back. Why? Catherine asked, the question raw. Why are you helping me? You don't know me. I'm nobody. You're not nobody, Eliza said fiercely. You're a woman who survived impossible things. You're a mother who loves her children enough to leave them temporarily so you can protect them permanently. You're someone who deserves help and support and the chance to build a better life. That's not nobody, Catherine. That's someone worth fighting for. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. I've never had anyone fight for me before. Well, you do now, Eliza said. You have all of us. The work was harder than Eliza had anticipated. It wasn't just providing shelter and food. It was holding space for trauma, for grief, for the slow, painful work of women learning to trust again. Catherine was followed by Anna, a woman who'd been working in a saloon and needed to escape before the work destroyed her completely. Anna was followed by Mary, whose family had disowned her for refusing an arranged marriage to a man twice her age. Each woman brought her own pain, her own story, her own particular needs, and each woman changed the Hartley household in ways both expected and surprising. The girls, Lila and Rose, grew up surrounded by women who'd survived impossible things. They learned early that strength came in many forms, that courage wasn't always loud, that sometimes the bravest thing a person could do was ask for help. They learned to set extra places at the table without question, to share their toys with women who'd never had childhoods of their own, to offer comfort in the small ways children could. Sarah blossomed into the work, her natural teaching ability finding purpose in helping women learn skills that might lead to employment. She taught reading and writing, basic arithmetic, even deportment for those who might seek positions in respectable households. Caleb adapted too, his quiet presence a reminder that not all men were dangerous, that some could be trusted. He made a point of never entering the women's spaces uninvited, of speaking to them with the same respect he'd show any guest, of making it clear through action that this house was safe. But the work took its toll too. Eliza found herself lying awake some nights, listening to Catherine cry herself to sleep down the hall, or hearing Anna's nightmares echo through the house. She carried the weight of their stories, and sometimes that weight felt crushing. It was on one such night, 3 months into the refuge's operation, that she finally broke. She was in the kitchen well past midnight, unable to sleep, baking bread because it was something she could control when everything else felt chaotic. Her hands worked the dough mechanically while tears streamed down her face. "Eliza?" She looked up to find Caleb in the doorway, lamplight casting shadows across his concerned face. "I'm fine," she said automatically, then laughed bitterly. "I'm not fine. I'm tired and overwhelmed, and I keep thinking about Catherine's boys with their aunt, about Anna's lost years, about Mary's family, who won't even speak to her. I keep thinking about all the women we can't help because there's only so much space and time and resources. Caleb crossed to her, gently took the dough from her hand, set it aside. Then he pulled her into his arms, and she collapsed against his chest like a puppet with cut strings. "You can't save everyone," he said quietly. "You can't fix everything. You're one person, Eliza. One person doing remarkable work, but still just one person." "It's not enough," she sobbed. "It'll never be enough." "No," Caleb agreed. "It won't. There will always be more women who need help than you can provide, more stories that break your heart, more injustice than you can fight. But that doesn't make what you're doing worthless. Every woman who walks through our door is one more person who didn't have to face her crisis alone. That matters. It matters tremendously." "What if I can't keep doing this?" Eliza whispered. "What if it breaks me?" "Then we'll figure something else out," Caleb said. "We'll find other ways to help. Or we'll take a break. Or we'll bring in more people to share the load. But Eliza, you don't have to carry this alone. You've got me. You've got Sarah. You've got ranch hands who help when needed and a reverend who sends women our way because he trusts what we're doing. You're not alone in this." Eliza pulled back to look at him, this man who'd become her anchor, her partner, her love. "How did I get so lucky to find you?" "You didn't find me," Caleb said, brushing tears from her cheeks. "We found each other. Two broken people who decided to build something better together. And we're still building, Eliza. This refuge, this family, this life. We're still building." "I love you," she said. "I don't say it enough, but I do. I love you more than I knew was possible." "I love you too," Caleb said. "Now come to bed. The bread can wait until morning." She let him lead her upstairs, let him hold her until sleep finally came. And when she woke the next morning to find Catherine already in the kitchen making coffee, Mary setting the table, and Anna teaching Rose a song she'd learned as a child, Eliza felt the weight lighten just slightly. This was the work. Not fixing everything, not saving everyone, but showing up day after day. Being present, offering what could be offered, building a place where women could be seen and valued and given the chance to become who they were meant to be. It was enough. It had to be enough. By autumn, the refuge had helped 9 women. Some stayed only weeks before finding work or making other arrangements. Others stayed months, building skills and savings and confidence. Catherine had found work at the general store and was slowly building a case to get her sons back from her sister. Anna was apprenticing with a seamstress in town. Mary had reconciled with a sympathetic aunt and was planning to move to Colorado to start fresh. The town's opinion remained divided. Some praised the Hartleys for their Christian charity. Others whispered that the house was nothing but a collection of fallen women, that Caleb was a fool for allowing his wife to run such an operation, that the whole thing was bound to end in scandal. But the whispers didn't stop the work. If anything, they fueled it. One evening in late September, Eliza and Caleb sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. The house behind them was full of life. The girls doing homework at the kitchen table, Sarah reading aloud to the current residents, the sound of women's voices blending in conversation and occasional laughter. "We did something good here," Eliza said quietly. "You did something good," Caleb corrected. "I just provided the space." "You provided more than space," Eliza said. "You provided trust, support, the belief that this work mattered. Without you, none of it would exist." Caleb was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. "I've been thinking about expanding. Expanding how?" "There's that old property on the edge of town," Caleb said. "The Henderson place. It's been empty since they moved to California. Big house, good bones, enough land for a garden. I could buy it, fix it up, make it a permanent refuge, something bigger than what we can offer here." Eliza's breath caught. "Caleb, that would cost—" "I know what it would cost," he said. "I can afford it. The ranch is doing well, better than well. And I've been thinking about legacy, about what I want to leave behind, not just land and cattle, something that matters, something that changes lives." "A permanent refuge," Eliza whispered, testing the idea. "We could help more women, provide real training programs, maybe even help them find employment, start businesses." "Exactly," Caleb said. "We'd need to hire staff, Someone to manage it when you're not there. Sarah could help, but she'd need support. It'd be a big undertaking. It would be, Eliza agreed. She thought about the women they'd helped, the ones they'd had to turn away because there wasn't room, the endless need that kept knocking at their door. But it would be worth it. Then we'll do it, Caleb said. Together. Eliza looked at this man who'd taken in a desperate widow with 2 children and turned that act of kindness into something transformative, who defended her to his family, supported her dreams, loved her without conditions or expectations, who was now offering to risk his fortune on expanding work that much of the town still viewed with suspicion. How did we get here? She asked. From a mail-order arrangement to this. We chose it, Caleb said simply. Every day, we chose each other. Chose honesty over pretense. Chose kindness over judgment. Chose to build something real instead of maintaining something hollow. I'd choose you again, Eliza said, 1,000 times over. I'd choose this life, this work, this love, all of it. Good, Caleb said, pulling her close. Because I'm not done building yet. We're just getting started. And sitting there on the porch of a house that had become a home, a refuge, a place where broken things could heal, Eliza believed him. They were just getting started, and whatever came next, whatever challenges or joys or sorrows the future held, they'd face it together, just as they'd always done, just as they always would. The Henderson property sat on 3 acres at the edge of town, close enough for convenience but far enough for privacy. The house itself was a sprawling 2-story structure that had seen better days, paint peeling, shutters hanging crooked, the porch sagging in places where the wood had rotted through. But Eliza could see past the decay to the potential beneath, the way she'd learned to see past surface damage to the worth hidden underneath. It's perfect, she said, standing in the overgrown yard with Caleb beside her. November wind carried the scent of coming snow, a reminder that winter would arrive whether they were ready or not. It needs a lot of work, Caleb said, his practical eye cataloging repairs. New roof, new porch, windows replaced, interior walls patched and painted. We're looking at months of construction. But it has 8 bedrooms, Eliza counted, moving toward the house. A kitchen large enough for teaching cooking skills. That back room could be a classroom for Sarah's lessons. The land is enough for a garden and maybe chickens. We could be nearly self-sufficient. We could, Caleb agreed. He'd already made the decision to buy the property, had signed papers with the bank that morning. But he wanted Eliza to see it, to confirm that this vision they were building together was worth the investment. I've talked to some of the ranch hands. Charlie's good with carpentry, says he'd be willing to work on it during slow season. Hank knows a roofer in Cheyenne who owes him a favor. When can we start? Eliza asked, her mind already racing with possibilities. Spring, Caleb said, soon as the ground thaws and materials can be transported reliably. But there's something else we need to discuss first. They walked through the empty house, their footsteps echoing on dusty floors. Sunlight filtered through grimy windows, illuminating rooms that had once held life and laughter, and would again if Eliza had anything to say about it. What is it? She asked. Caleb stopped in what had probably been the main parlor, a room with good light and a fireplace that would need cleaning but appeared structurally sound. If we're going to do this properly, make it a real charitable organization, we need to be smart about it, legal, above reproach. What do you mean? I mean, we need a board of directors, people with standing in the community who can vouch for the work, who can help secure donations and support, people whose names on our documents will make it harder for critics to dismiss what we're doing. Eliza's stomach tightened. You're talking about respectable people, the kind who cross the street to avoid women like the ones we help. Some, yes, Caleb admitted, but not all. Reverend Paulson has already agreed to serve on the board, and there's a woman in Cheyenne, Mrs. Elizabeth Warren, who runs a similar operation there. She's offered to advise us, lend her name and reputation. And your sister? Eliza asked, because Margaret's absence from their lives had been a wound neither of them spoke about directly. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. I went to see her last week. Didn't tell you because I wasn't sure how it would go. Caleb, she's softening, he said. Not much, but some. I told her about the Henderson property, about making the refuge official. Asked if she'd consider being on the board. What did she say? She said she'd think about it, Caleb replied. Which, from Margaret, is practically an enthusiastic yes. I think she's been watching what we're doing, seeing the women we've helped, hearing stories about Catherine getting her boys back, about Anna building a real life for herself. It's harder to dismiss the work when you can see the results. Eliza moved to the window, looking out at the overgrown garden. I never wanted to come between you and your family. You didn't, Caleb said, coming to stand beside her. Margaret and I came between ourselves by having different values. But maybe there's room for both of us to be right. She wants to protect family reputation. I want to do work that matters. Maybe we can find a way to do both. And if we can't, then we keep doing what we're doing, Caleb said firmly, with or without her approval. But I'd like to try, for both our sakes. The confrontation with Margaret came sooner than expected. She arrived at the ranch house 3 days later, this time without Thomas, her expression guarded but not hostile. I'd like to see what you're doing, she said without preamble. The refuge work. I'd like to understand it. Eliza and Sarah exchanged glances. They currently had 4 women in residence. Catherine still, though she was preparing to move into her own place with her sons, plus 3 newcomers in various stages of healing and planning. Of course, Eliza said carefully. Would you like coffee? The women are in the kitchen preparing dinner. Margaret followed them inside, her posture rigid, her eyes taking in everything. The house was clean but lived in, with children's drawings still on the walls and the comfortable clutter of multiple people sharing space. In the kitchen, Catherine was teaching one of the newer women, a girl named Rebecca, who couldn't have been more than 19, how to make pie crust, while another woman read aloud from a newspaper, practicing her letters. They looked up when Margaret entered, their expressions wary. Women who'd learned to fear judgment could spot it a mile away. Ladies, Eliza said, this is Mrs. Margaret Hartley, Caleb's sister. She's come to learn more about our work. Margaret, this is Catherine Wells, Rebecca Martin, and Hannah Foster. Ma'am, the women murmured, polite but cautious. Margaret's gaze settled on Catherine. I know you, she said slowly. Your husband, Bill Wells. He drinks at the saloon, makes a spectacle of himself. I've seen him. Catherine's hands stilled in the pie dough. Yes, ma'am. That's my husband. Was my husband. We're not together anymore. He hit you, Margaret said, and it wasn't a question. Yes, ma'am, Catherine said quietly. For years. Until I finally left. And your children? I have them back now, Catherine said, and there was pride in her voice. I found work at the general store, saved money, found a small house to rent. My boys live with me now. They're safe. Margaret was quiet, processing this. Then she looked at Rebecca. And you? Rebecca, young and frightened, glanced at Eliza before answering. I came from Colorado, ma'am. Answered an advertisement for work that turned out to be something else. Mrs. Hartley found me at the stage stop, brought me here. I've been learning to read properly, learning skills that might help me find real work. You were deceived, Margaret said. Yes, ma'am, badly deceived. If Mrs. Hartley hadn't helped me, I don't know what would have happened. Margaret turned to the third woman, Hannah, who was older, perhaps 40, with gray threading through her dark hair and the kind of weariness that came from surviving more than anyone should have to endure. I don't have a story as clear as theirs, Hannah said before Margaret could ask. Just years of bad choices and worse luck. A husband who died and left me with debts I couldn't pay. Work that paid too little and cost too much. I was about to do something desperate when I heard about this place. Mrs. Hartley took me in, no questions asked. Given me time to breathe and think and plan, I'm learning bookkeeping from Miss Sarah. Might be able to find work as a clerk if I can get good enough at it. Margaret stood in that kitchen full of women society had written off, women who were working and learning and rebuilding their lives, and something in her expression shifted. I owe you an apology, she said, addressing Eliza directly. I judged this work without understanding it. I saw scandal where I should have seen charity. I saw weakness where there was actually tremendous strength. Margaret, Eliza started, but Margaret held up a hand. Please, let me finish. I was wrong about you. When you arrived, I saw a plain woman with children and assumed you were here to take advantage of my brother's loneliness. I didn't see a survivor. I didn't see someone who'd turn her own suffering into something that could help others. I didn't see the woman my brother saw. Thank you, Eliza said quietly. That means more than you know. I'd like to help, Margaret said. If you'll have me. Caleb mentioned you need board members for the new property. I have connections in town, people who respect my family name. I could help secure donations, supplies, support from merchants. Why the change of heart? Sarah asked, her tone not quite suspicious but close. Margaret looked at the women gathered in the kitchen, really looked at them. Because I've been thinking about my own life, about how I married Thomas because it was expected, because he had money and position, and I've been content, safe, comfortable. But watching what you're building here, women choosing to help each other, building something real instead of maintaining appearances, I realized I've spent my whole life maintaining appearances, and I'm tired of it. Helping us won't make you popular with your friends, Eliza warned. Perhaps I need better friends, Margaret said with a flash of the steel that ran in the Hartley family. So, yes, I'd like to help, if you'll let me. Eliza looked at Caleb, who'd been standing quietly in the doorway listening. He nodded slightly, leaving the decision to her as he always did. We'd be honored to have your help, Eliza said, extending her hand to Margaret. Welcome to the work. Winter came hard that year, closing the mountain passes and blanketing the territory in snow that made travel nearly impossible. But inside the Hartley house and the growing plans for the Henderson property, spring was already taking root. Margaret proved true to her word. She organized a fundraising social in town, inviting prominent families and presenting the refuge work as Christian charity rather than radical social reform. Her endorsement opened doors that had been closed, loosened purse strings that had been tight. Donations of money, materials, and labor began arriving, slowly at first, then with increasing momentum as the community began to understand what was being built. Reverend Paulson used his pulpit to speak about welcoming strangers and helping the vulnerable, carefully framing the refuge as an extension of religious duty. Mrs. Warren from Cheyenne sent detailed advice about organizational structure, hiring practices, and how to navigate the complex social dynamics of charitable work. By the time spring arrived and construction could begin on the Henderson property, they had enough funding for a proper renovation and 6 months of operating expenses. More importantly, they had community support. Tentative and conditional perhaps, but real. Lila and Rose, now 6 years old, participated in the work in their own ways. They helped Sarah teach younger women their letters, played with the children of women who came through the refuge, carried messages and small items between the main house and the construction site. They were growing up knowing that their family was built on kindness, that home was a place you created for others as much as for yourself. One evening in late April, with construction well underway on the Henderson property and the last of the winter snow finally melting from the high passes, Eliza found herself alone in the barn with Hope, the calf that Lila and Rose had named almost a year ago. Hope was grown now, nearly ready for breeding, her copper coat gleaming in the lamplight. "You're getting big," Eliza said, stroking the young cow's nose. "Hard to remember when you were small enough for the girls to name." "Everything grows if you give it time and care," Caleb said from behind her. He'd come in quietly, carrying his own lamp. "Hope, the girls, this refuge, us, Eliza repeated, smiling. "We've grown, haven't we?" "We have," Caleb agreed. He came to stand beside her, and they watched Hope in comfortable silence. "Remember when you first arrived? How you apologized for existing before anyone even asked you to?" "I remember," Eliza said. "I remember thinking I'd be sent away the moment you saw me, that no one could possibly want someone like me." "I wanted you," Caleb said quietly. "From that first day, watching you with the girls, seeing how you tried so hard to be invisible while simultaneously being the most real person I'd met in years, I wanted you. Not because you were useful or convenient or filled a gap, because you were you." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. "I love you, you know, more than I ever thought possible, more than I have words for." "I know," Caleb said.
I love you too, and I'm proud of you, of what you've built, what you're building. You took your own pain and turned it into something that helps others heal. That's remarkable, Eliza. We built it together, she corrected. I couldn't have done any of this without you, your support, your resources, your willingness to risk your reputation for work that matters.
Our reputation, Caleb said. It's our reputation now. Our work. Our life. They stood there in the warm barn, two people who'd started as strangers bound by desperation and duty, who'd become partners and then lovers, and now something deeper than either, two halves of a whole that was stronger for the breaking and healing they'd both endured. The Henderson property opened officially on a bright morning in June. The house had been transformed, fresh white paint, new shutters, a porch that no longer sagged but stood strong and welcoming. Inside, 8 bedrooms waited with clean linens and curtains that Sarah had sewn. The kitchen gleamed with new equipment purchased through Margaret's fundraising. The classroom held slates and books and everything needed for teaching women skills that might lead to independence. Above the door, a simple wooden sign read, Hartley House, a refuge for women. The opening ceremony was small but meaningful. Reverend Paulson blessed the building. Margaret gave a speech about community responsibility. Mrs. Warren spoke via letter that Eliza read aloud about the importance of giving women second chances. And then Eliza, standing on the new porch with Caleb beside her and the girls holding her hands, spoke from her heart. This house exists because I know what it feels like to be desperate and alone, she said to the small gathered crowd. I know what it means to arrive somewhere with nothing but hope and fear, not knowing if you'll be turned away or welcomed. I was welcomed. Given not just shelter, but partnership, respect, love. This house is my way of paying that forward, of saying to every woman who walks through these doors, you matter, you're worth fighting for, you deserve safety and dignity and the chance to build a life on your own terms. She looked at the women who'd already been through the refuge, who'd gathered to support this new chapter, Catherine with her 2 boys clinging to her skirts. Anna in the dress she'd sewn herself, proud of her new business. Mary, who'd traveled from Colorado just for this opening. Hannah, who'd found work as a bookkeeper and was saving to start her own small business. You are the proof that this work matters, Eliza continued. Each of you took the chance we offered and built something real with it. You should be proud. I'm proud of you, proud to know you, proud to call you friends. There were tears then, freely shed and unashamed. And when the first resident of the new Hartley house arrived that very afternoon, a woman named Grace, who'd fled an abusive situation in Montana, there were people ready to welcome her, to feed her, to listen to her story without judgment, to help her begin the slow work of rebuilding. As summer deepened into autumn and the refuge found its rhythm, Eliza discovered she was pregnant. The news came as a surprise. She'd assumed at 33, after years of difficulty in her first marriage, that children might not be possible. But the doctor confirmed it, and when she told Caleb, his face transformed with a joy so pure it took her breath away. A baby, he whispered, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. Our baby. Are you happy? Eliza asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. Happy doesn't cover it, Caleb said. Terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once. How are you feeling? The same, Eliza admitted. And wondering how we'll manage with the newborn and the refuge and everything else. We'll manage the way we always do, Caleb said. Together, with help from Sarah and the other women. With faith that we can figure it out as we go. When they told Lila and Rose, the girls' reaction was immediate and ecstatic. A real baby? Lila breathed. A brother or sister? We don't know yet which it'll be, Eliza said, pulling them both close. But yes, a real baby. What do you think about that? I think it's perfect, Rose said seriously. Our family keeps growing. First it was just us, then Papa Caleb, then all the women at the refuge, now a baby. We're like hope. We just keep getting bigger. Eliza laughed through tears at the comparison. That's exactly right. We keep growing. The baby, a daughter they named Grace, after the first woman welcomed to the new refuge, was born in March on a morning when the snow was finally beginning to melt and the first brave crocuses were pushing through frozen ground. She came into the world surrounded by love, held first by her mother, then her father,
then passed carefully to sisters who'd waited months to meet her. "She's so small," Lila whispered, awestruck. "Were we ever that small?" Rose asked. "You were," Eliza confirmed. "Exactly that small, and just as perfect." That first year of Grace's life was chaos and joy in equal measure. The refuge continued its work, now with Sarah as the primary manager and a small staff of women who'd been through the program themselves and wanted to give back. Margaret became an unlikely but effective advocate, her society connections bringing in steady donations and community support. The Hartley Ranch thrived too. Caleb expanded operations, hired more hands, built the business into something even more substantial. But he never lost sight of what mattered most: coming home each evening to a house full of life and love, and the particular music of multiple generations sharing space. One evening in late summer, when Grace was 6 months old and babbling contentedly in Eliza's arms while Lila and Rose played with Hope's new calf in the yard, Caleb and Eliza sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Eliza asked. "If you'd sent me away that first day, if you'd been like Jack Denton and decided I wasn't pretty enough or the girls were too much complication." "I try not to think about that," Caleb said honestly, "because it scares me. How close we came to missing this, how easily I could have made a different choice." "But you didn't," Eliza said. "You chose kindness. You chose to see value where others saw only complications. You chose us." "Best choice I ever made," Caleb said. "Every day since has proven it." Grace gurgled, reaching for her father, and he took her with the practiced ease of a man who'd learned that love came in many forms: romantic love, parental love, the love of building something meaningful with a partner who understood your values. "What do you think she'll remember?" Eliza asked, watching Grace's tiny hands grip Caleb's finger. "When she's grown, what do you think she'll remember about growing up here?" "I hope she remembers that home is something you build," Caleb said. "That family is people choosing to show up for each other. That being beautiful has nothing to do with appearance and everything to do with how you treat people who need help." "I hope she remembers she was wanted," Eliza added. "That she came into a family built on choosing each other, on refusing to give up when things got hard, on turning pain into purpose." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their daughters play while the sky turned from gold to pink to purple. The house behind them held Sarah preparing dinner, the sounds of a household running smoothly because everyone in it contributed and cared. Down the road, the Hartley House Refuge sheltered 6 women in various stages of healing and planning, each one building toward a future they'd choose for themselves. It wasn't perfect. There were still hard days, still women they couldn't help, still criticism from those who thought the work was too radical or improper. But it was real. And real, Eliza had learned, was so much better than any fantasy. The years passed, as they do. Lila and Rose grew into young women who understood the value of compassion, who'd grown up watching their mother turn suffering into service and learned to do the same. They both eventually became teachers, passing on the skills Sarah had taught them, carrying forward the tradition of helping others learn and grow. Grace grew up surrounded by women who'd survived impossible things, who'd rebuilt their lives from rubble. She learned early that strength came in many forms, that asking for help wasn't weakness, that the most important work was often the hardest and least celebrated. The Hartley House Refuge helped hundreds of women over the years. Some stayed days, some stayed months, but all left with more than they'd arrived with: skills, savings, plans, and the knowledge that they were worth fighting for. Caleb and Eliza grew old together, their hair graying and hands weathering, but their partnership remaining strong. They weathered financial troubles and family deaths, droughts and bitter winters, the endless challenges that life on the frontier demanded. But they weathered it together, choosing each other every morning, building their life one day at a time. Margaret became one of the refuge's most stalwart supporters, eventually taking over much of the administrative work when Eliza's health began to fail in her later years. The two women, once adversaries, became true sisters, united in work that mattered more than old grievances. Sarah never married, but never seemed to regret it. She said once that she'd found her purpose in teaching, in helping women discover their own worth and potential. When she was old, surrounded by former students who'd gone on to build remarkable lives, she said she couldn't imagine a better legacy.
And on a spring morning, 30 years after that first stagecoach arrival, Eliza Hartley sat on her porch with great-grandchildren playing in the yard and the Hartley house still operating down the road, now run by women who'd been helped there themselves. Caleb sat beside her, his hand in hers, both of them watching the children with the contentment of people who'd built something that would outlast them. "We did good, didn't we?" Eliza said softly. "We did," Caleb agreed. "We built something real, something that matters." "I never thought I'd have this," Eliza admitted. "When I stepped off that stagecoach terrified and desperate, apologizing for existing, I never imagined it could lead here, to this life, this love, this legacy." "I never thought I'd feel again," Caleb said. "After Sarah died, after years of living in that hollow house, I thought I was done, that duty and work were all I had left. You proved me wrong. You gave me everything I didn't know I needed." "We gave each other everything," Eliza corrected. "That's what partnership means. That's what choosing each other every day builds." Down at the refuge, a new woman was arriving. Eliza could see the wagon from where she sat. Another frightened soul seeking shelter, seeking the chance to rebuild. Another story that would end better because someone had chosen to help instead of turn away. "They'll take care of her," Caleb said, following her gaze. "Just like we took care of all the others. The work continues." "The work continues," Eliza echoed. And then, because she'd learned long ago that the most important words were often the simplest, "I love you, Caleb Hartley. Thank you for choosing me." "Thank you for letting me," Caleb said, "for building this life with me, for teaching me that love isn't something that just happens. It's something you choose and build and fight for every single day." They sat there as the sun climbed higher, as children played and the refuge welcomed another woman seeking hope, as the life they'd built together continued thriving around them. It wasn't the ending Eliza had expected when she'd answered that mail-order advertisement so many years ago. It was better. It was real. It was built on choices made day after day to be kind, to show up, to believe that broken things could heal and broken people could build something beautiful together. And in the end, that was the only story that mattered. Not the one about the plain mail-order bride and the widowed rancher, though that's how it started. But the story about two people who chose partnership over pretense, honesty over appearance, love over duty, who built a family from pieces no one else wanted and proved that the best families aren't the ones you're born into, but the ones you build through choosing each other, day after day, year after year, until choosing becomes as natural as breathing. Hope had been the calf's name, but it had also been the seed they'd planted, Eliza and Caleb and every woman who'd walked through their doors seeking a second chance. Hope that broken things could heal. Hope that kindness mattered. Hope that no one was too damaged or complicated or imperfect to deserve love and dignity and the chance to build a better life. And that hope, planted in Wyoming soil and watered with tears and tended with patience, had grown into something remarkable, something that would outlast them all, something that proved day after day that love wasn't about being perfect or pretty or uncomplicated. Love was about showing up, about choosing each other, about building something real together, one honest conversation and one act of kindness at a time. That was the story. That was the legacy. That was what mattered in the end, and it was more than enough. It was everything.